A very good afternoon and welcome to this e-conference on assessing, beyond COVID-19, assessing social protection in Uganda. This is an e-conference, so we'll have quite a large number of panelists to help us navigate through what is this discussion about social protection, especially at a time like this. My name is Charles Mwangusha-Mpagi, and we're coming to you with an in-studio audience from here at the Serena International Conference Center, but also have other people be joining us virtually to keep in line with social distancing. This discussion is brought to you by the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights in partnership with DGF and a raft of government agencies that deal with social protection, whom I'll be introducing to you shortly. We'll start with an overview to bring us to speed on what this e-conference is about, why we need to be having this discussion at the moment, why not later. We also have a keynote presentation from the Minister of State for Gender, Labour and Social Development, the Honorable Florence Nachiwala-Kiyingi. She will be joining us virtually. I understand the Minister is already with us, so she'll be joining us in a moment soon. Let me introduce the people I have here with me. I have Ms. Salima Namusobia from ISER. ISER is the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles.
And thank you for putting this together.
Thank you.
We'll be going into your remarks in a moment. We have, of course, like I said, we have the Honorable Minister, Florence Nachiwala-Kiyingi, who's joining us virtually. Honorable Minister, you're most welcome. We're happy to have you this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We are looking forward to your keynote presentation in a few minutes. I have with me in studio also Sylvia Namutebi. Muevwa. Sylvia Muevwa. Very nice to have you. Sylvia is from the Equal Opportunities Commission. You lead the Equal Opportunities Commission. Very nice to have you here. I have also Mr. Bernard Mujuni, is Commissioner Equity and Rights, but in studio this afternoon representing the Permanent Secretary of the Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Very nice to have you, Mr. Mujuni.
Thank you, Charles, for having me here.
I'll introduce the other people we have here and elsewhere as we get them along. But let me start with you, Salima. Please, we have a large audience following us, so make your keynote a few remarks and bring us up to speed on why you're putting this together, why we're having this discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. The Honorable Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, Honorable Nachiwala-Kiyingi. We are very glad that you're joining us virtually. My fellow panelists, all protocol observed, our participants, both on TV and social media, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all to this e-conference under the theme Beyond COVID-19, Assessing Social Protection in Uganda, where we shall be taking stock of the existing social protection mechanisms in Uganda and examine their efficiency in terms of cushioning all affected individuals and groups from the income shocks and other vulnerabilities that may befall them from time to time. Now, social protection broadly refers to all interventions aimed at protecting individuals and groups against the risks and vulnerabilities associated with unemployment, parental and caring responsibilities, sickness and healthcare, disability, old age, housing and social exclusion. Now, according to a February 2020 World Bank Economic Update on Uganda, 1 in 5 Ugandans still lives in extreme poverty, and more than a third live on less than $1.90 a day. Now, following the advent of COVID-19 in March 2020, the Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development also did an assessment of the short-term impacts of COVID-19, and among other things, they anticipated that there will be an increase in the number of poor people by 2.6 million. Now, in 2020 alone, alongside COVID-19, Uganda has experienced emergencies such as floods, locust invasion, rising water levels on Lake Victoria, and droughts, which have serious social and economic impacts on the population, and have unmasked disparities in terms of capacities of individuals and groups to be able to cope with the shocks that are resulting from these various disasters. Now, the implementation of the strict lockdown measures in response to COVID-19 increased the risks and vulnerabilities to cover people who do not ordinarily seek social protection interventions, and this resulted in demands for food assistance, access to healthcare, and access to savings under the National Social Security Fund, as we are all aware. The lockdown also disrupted traditional social protection systems like the family and clan support systems, the church groups that people always resort to, the local savings and credit schemes that people refer to as NIGINA, and then also the various barrier groups that people do have from time to time. But we see that social security and health insurance covers only 2% of the Ugandan population respectively, while the informal sector remains largely uncovered. And yet we've seen that the informal sector has been highly impacted by the COVID response that has happened. And the informal sector, we also know that it does covers 84%, approximately 85% of Ugandans. And therefore, that means that there is a large group of Ugandans that remain vulnerable, and that is what has necessitated this discussion to speak about the responsibility of the state in terms of providing social protection mechanisms to be able to cushion the various individuals. Now, the redistributive character of social protection plays an important role in poverty reduction and promoting social inclusion. Studies have showed that social protection systems with wide population coverage and adequate benefit levels have been effective in reducing poverty and inequality. It has also been documented that welfare policies that provide more generous transfers and better quality services are likely to improve public health and reduce health and education inequities. Social protection is therefore an indispensable part of any coordinated policy response to any crisis, because it ensures that people can effectively access health care while supporting job and income security for those most affected. It also acts as a powerful economic and social stabilizer while stimulating aggregate demand required for economic recovery in times of crisis and beyond. Uganda's Vision 2040 underscores the importance of social protection to address risks and vulnerabilities, and our third National Development Plan includes increased access to social protection among the key development strategies to be pursued between 2020 and 2025. The National Social Protection Policy 2015 is rightly themed income security and dignified lives for all, with the objectives to increase access to social security, enhance care, protection and support for vulnerable people, and strengthen the institutional framework for social protection and service delivery. Accordingly, the government of Uganda is implementing various social protection interventions, including but not limited to social security schemes like the Public Service Pension Scheme and the National Social Security Fund, as well as social protection programs to vulnerable groups, for example, the Senior Citizen Grant, which we regularly refer to as SAGE, and the Disability Grant. However, concerns remain about the scope and coverage of existing programs, their inclusiveness, and adequacy of the legal and policy framework relating to social protection. We are hoping that the discussions this afternoon will respond to the above questions, but also speak to why social protection is important and what a robust social protection system should look like, especially one that follows a human rights-based approach. The Initiative for Social and Economic Rights would like to thank the government, specifically the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, for their cooperation in enabling this conversation. And special thanks also go to the Equal Opportunities Commission, the Uganda Retirement Benefits Authority, the Makerere University School of Public Health, the Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection, and partners representing special interest groups and civil society for availing themselves to fully participate in this conversation. Lastly, but not least, I would like to thank the Democratic Governance Facility, DGF, for providing financial support for this conference. But also, I would like to thank the NTV for providing this excellent opportunity and doing a good job in terms of hosting this conference. I wish us fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Salima. In normal times, we would have given you a round of applause. I would have asked that we give you a round of applause, but the President advised us that the left hand is our hand. The right hand is the public hand, so don't clap hands. We'll try to stay away from that. May I now invite the Honourable Minister, the Honourable Florence Nachiwala Chiyingi, also Member of Parliament, to give us her keynote address for this conference. And then after that keynote, we will go into a panel discussion with the panelists that I've introduced and some others that I've not yet introduced. I will introduce later. Honourable Minister, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much. I thank the panelists who are here. I also thank the residents, and I thank NTV, and I thank Ugandans. For one, watching NTV, two, being there to observe the SOPs under COVID. We are all going through hard times. And as a government, we are really bent on ensuring that our population is home and safe. And today we are looking at social protection, and I'm glad to know that much of it has been highlighted in the intro part. So really, I have not much that I can say, but now to go on to the point, the government of Uganda certainly recognizes that social protection is a critical prerequisite for achieving national development goals, and the need to guarantee social protection to the population and provide assistance to people who are vulnerable either by age, social class, location, gender, disability, disaster, or anybody who does not have income, or in order to promote equity across the board. So that is particularly the role of the Ministry of Gender in collaboration with other ministries, departments, and agencies. And we are proud to have the Equal Opportunities Commission, which is at the central pinnacle, ensuring that all this can be harmonized to create equality for all people. Social protection has become a major development intervention because it directly reduces poverty, supports excluded citizens to access services, provides a foundation on which to build productive livelihoods, as well as enabling citizens to live a life that is secure and dignified. Here we are looking at the young people below the age of 30, divided into the youth and the children, and then who form almost 78% of the population. In this particular regard, the children form 53, and the youth form close to 21% of the population. So we also have people with disabilities, have the women, we have the elderly, and above all, labor, to make sure that it's all harmonized. So it aims at empowering all citizens to participate in and benefit from the social and economic transformation in the country. In 2015, as she rightly mentioned, the government of Uganda passed the National Social Protection Policy as an integral part of Uganda's Vision 2040 and promote effective coordination and implementation of the relevant social protection interventions. The social protection policy is premised on the provisions of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda and the laws that address issues of risks and vulnerabilities, as well as regional and international instruments the country is party to. It is also consistent with other national policies and planning frameworks. The Uganda Vision 2040 underscores the importance of the social protection to address risks and vulnerabilities. Government recognizes the need to provide assistance to people who are vulnerable. As I said, they fall into age, sex, gender, location, and the disability across the board. The vision envisages a social protection system that includes a universal pension for older persons, public work schemes for vulnerable unemployed persons, and social assistance for vulnerable children. Persons with disabilities are also taken into account and are destitute in this overall policy. The vision also identifies universal health insurance as one of the key strategies for alleviating the high cost of health care by households and enhancing access to affordable health services for all. Though I have to highlight here and now that the informal sector comprises of 68%, not 84%, as earlier mentioned in the intro part of our discussion. It is far lower than that. The National Development Plan also highlights social protection as one of the key areas and strategies for transforming Uganda from a peasantry society to a modern and prosperous country. You have heard the president now and again trying to transverse all over the country slightly before COVID to highlight to the country that the mission of the NRM and the government in general is to transform the economy and the people therein from a peasantry economy to a prosperous country. And here he has always referred to people working for the stomach alone, people working for a day-to-day living, to step that up to a prosperous economy. The government is also implementing social systems meant at protecting individuals and companies across the board. The Public Service Pension Scheme, PSPS, the National Social Security Fund, NSSF, and the Parliamentary Pension Scheme to ensure that workers are guaranteed a decent life upon retirement. The core of national social protection systems is to provide regular and reliable transfers of money to all people, both direct and indirect, in social grants for vulnerable, including Uganda's Senior Citizens Grant and the Disability Grants. Here we also have to look at the child support grants, especially in the Office of the Vulnerable Children and the unemployment benefits. As a result, the government has been able to provide a secure platform upon which individuals can build productive and sustainable livelihoods, directly reducing employment and vulnerability, as well as supporting excluded citizens in accessing all the services. Here we looked at the Manifesto Week, where I took the country through what has been done by the Ministry of Gender. And under these assistance platforms, we acquired 85% of our targeted promises by the NRM to the country. So to speak, that empowerment of the elder people programs in Uganda has been rolled out to the rest of the country, which indicates that the income received by the beneficiaries has resulted into improved nutritional status of household members. I also have to highlight here that UNICEF made a survey, a countrywide survey in 2015, and highlighted that the first rollout of SAGE in those areas, the elder people had been able to move from 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day and to take their grandchildren to school, because they used to send the grandchildren to fetch firewood and do the household nitty-gritties as compared to going to school. So when they get the citizens grant, then they are able to sort some issues out for themselves. So contributory social security systems such as NSSF have also minimized income shocks associated with health, unemployment, and retirement. So I wish you safe deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for those remarks. Quite interesting revelations from the Minister as we get into the panel discussion of this e-conference. I need to remind our viewers from wherever you are, whether you're joining us via the live TV, which we are on from studio here, or if you're following us via the various social media platforms that we have, we have sign language provision. Susan Mujawa is providing sign language interpretation for our people who have difficulty following the discussion as we have it in studio here. Let me introduce my panel now that is going to discuss both the remarks, the opening remarks from Salima and the keynote from the Honorable Minister. The Minister will stay with us virtually, so if we have some questions for the Minister, we also still get her to participate in this discussion. Let me introduce the people I have with me here again. Starting with Mr. Martin Nsubuga. Mr. Nsubuga is the Chief Executive Officer at the Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority, UBRA. Mr. Nsubuga, very nice to have you.
Thank you.
I have Sylvia Muwewa Ntambi, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Uganda Equal Opportunities Commission. Very nice to have you. And like I had introduced Bernard before, let me see who else I have virtually, because I have some people, some panelists joining us, not from in studio here, who will be joining us to have this discussion with us. Let me just confirm that they are ready. Mr. Were? Mr. Were, are you with us? Yes, Mr. Were, very nice to have you. Let me just ask you to introduce yourself fully. Let me ask you to introduce yourself fully to our viewers.
Yeah, my name is Were Wataga Emmanuel Fred. I work with Uganda Reach the Aged Association. This is an aged care association which has members, older person association members, and also individual members who have a heart for older persons. I work as the head of programs here.
Thank you very much, Fred, for joining us. Do I have another panelist? Okay, so for now we'll have Fred joining us. I want to start from here and seek a very broad understanding, because right now, apart from Fred, the rest of the team that I have is government. I want to start with you, Mr. Mujuni.
Yes, please.
What is that understanding of social protection in Uganda's context?
All right, thank you so much, Charles, for the opportunity to share this with the audience. And as already laid down, the landscape already made by my Honorable Minister, the social protection which we are working on or from within in this country is catered for under the expanding, under the National Social Protection Policy. And the policy has its program and of intervention. And so it caters for everybody in this country. It provides for different avenues for resourcing the social protection infrastructure. And one of them is the social security where the NSF falls and direct income support, where SAGE supporting the vulnerable senior citizens falls, and then disability grants falls. We also have under that the social insurance and to do with the workers' compensation, you know, any other insurance that to mitigate the risk. And largely also the other aspect or pillar is social care and support. Social care and support provides for now psychosocial support. You saw people clamoring for psychosocial support. You know, we are, you know, people almost going to the extremes. Some of the countries elsewhere under this COVID were committing suicide. All that is psychosocial support. And then GBV, of course, gender-based violence and violence against children is also psychosocial support, and which falls under social care and support. And now, the other aspect is that social protection is supposed to be the process of mitigating social risks and shocks and build resilience within the community, within the society. To have an equal society is to have a harmonious coexistence. And therefore, it provides opportunities for people to tap into their potential and create wealth. That is the bare minimum in terms of social protection. Now, the other aspect is that it is supposed to provide the framework for creating other opportunities other than just mitigating risks. You see, for such a long time, this country has been investing in physical infrastructure, roads, you know, electricity and all that. And this is the time now to go into the social infrastructure. And once you build the social infrastructure, the whole game plan is done. And now the COVID response measures demand or reveal that we are into this together. You cannot say that you're not vulnerable or income secure. And also to tell you that poverty is not just lack of income. You could be having income but very vulnerable to risk. And this is what came out. I remember riding a bicycle across the hills, and I was very, very much vulnerable to any other risk. But my colleagues had never even tried to ride a bicycle on this Kampala highway. And therefore, what does that teach us? We must invest in social infrastructure, in social protection, to leverage, to make sure that people are secure. Yeah, that is
just a quick question to you. That's quite a broad spectrum.
Yes.
But COVID has provided us an opportunity.
Yes,
of course, we've been talking about when the president was giving his State of the Nation address the other day,
yes,
and I think his 15th address on COVID-19, trying to map the broader challenges that the country has faced. So COVID is one shock that comes in between March and now. Nobody has an idea for how long we'll be running with this.
Yes.
But you also have perennial floods.
Oh, yes.
That have destabilized people. You have invasion of locusts. But the project that you've been running at the Ministry of Gender, which is the SAGE project, when you get out of the people we meet here, you realize that the level of vulnerability is a lot higher.
It's spread.
Can this country afford a welfare state?
Charles, this is not so much about welfare state. Actually, it is the role of the state in the development process. The active role of the state, and you have seen this coming, even in America, in Europe, in everywhere. The state can no longer say, okay, go it alone, let it only be the private sector. No, it must be together into it. What avenues of investment are we opening up to create more jobs, for example? Can the state create jobs? Yes, the state can create jobs. And this is what we are saying that. Now, you've talked about the areas of locusts and risks and the floods and disasters coming in, and even issues to do with refugees. You see,
you have refugees, you have
yes,
droughts, you have...
Yes, exactly. Yes. And therefore, the government has earmarked 80 billion shillings to address these areas which have been hit by floods that have been exposed to locust invasion and such risks. And actually, our ministry is in charge of coordinating this intervention. Now, that is just one stimulus package, but His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Uganda, announced a huge multitude of incentives to activate the economy, the so-called real economy, and that's where the niche is. Can you tease out some of these things? What are the areas? You see, COVID has been, there are different types of accidents. Others are bad, others could be fair accidents. Yes, so COVID, I think, is a fair accident. It has taken us to the reality check. What can we now talk about in order to create avenues for creating shocks against any kind of, mitigating shocks against any risk that can come anytime? Look, we need to look at agriculture. You know, we need to incentivize and create framework for investing in agriculture. We also need to look at productivity in terms of labor. The first 1 week of COVID, we got over 200 plus notices to do with the redundancies. And the biggest number of people who are submitting notice for laying off workers were funeral homes. Can you imagine? And they employ over thousands and thousands of people. So you can imagine how, but hitherto, hey, people were dying normally, and you run to, actually the price was quite high. You wouldn't want to try.
But even when you're talking about that number, you're talking about a fraction of people who, of employers, who are conscious about their legal obligations to the people they employ. Majority of Ugandans are not formally employed. They don't save with NSSF.
Perfect.
They do not have job contracts.
They don't have fallback.
Yes, they don't have job contracts that protect their rights as employees. So those haven't come to you.
And exactly that's what we are saying, that now the reality check, as HE guided, is that now you have to look at the sectors which employ the biggest number of the people, which is agriculture, almost 80%, and that's where we should put our effort. But just to let you know that even then, that's not enough. You see, even the nature of work, have you been even quantifying, for example, the lost labor from household?
Maybe let's ask Sylvia to help us out there, because Sylvia, if you're dealing with a population, it's difficult in this country, the structure of our population, to define who is vulnerable and who is not vulnerable. You sit and you've been advocating for equality of opportunity, of access to opportunity. But I can imagine how much you're facing and what you have to deal with at the Equal Opportunities Commission. If you have 8 million Ugandans described as living in extreme poverty, you have an extra maybe 12 million that are teetering on the edge. Now, COVID-19 must be sending a lot of those down the cliff to join the vulnerable. Those are the ones living. I think Salima was talking about that, quoting from the World Bank report. Yeah. From where you stand, can you help us with this contextualization of vulnerability and social protection?
Thank you very much. Our viewers and my dear panelists, I think this is a very difficult moment for us. And for us as the Equal Opportunities Commission, given our mandate and what I usually talk about, issues of inequality, issues of discrimination. But there is also another role that I've always talked about, and that is our role when we are talking about the Public Finance Management Act, issues of planning and budgeting. And I've always told the audience that I speak to that everyone is vulnerable, given the situation that is prevailing. And I think right now we are in that context. We are all vulnerable, depending on what comes up. And that's why we have to plan for each and everyone, depending on their needs and interests. So it is time now for us to wake up. This is a wake-up call for all of us, especially the people in Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Who are you planning for, and what are you planning for? I've heard you talk about floods. Is it happening for the first time? No. Who do they plan for? We are all vulnerable at a specific moment. However, there are those who are more vulnerable at a given time, much as all of us are vulnerable. And I think that's why even when the COVID situation came in, you can see the first people they addressed were the vulnerable, not knowing that as the situation goes on, we shall see that even other people are vulnerable, much as we have the enlisted ones. So we are all vulnerable, given the situation that comes in.
Your mandate is at two levels. One is advocating for equity.
Yes.
The other is supporting those vulnerable groups. But you are a government body.
Yes.
So to whom are you sending this message? To whom do you send this message of equalization, of ensuring equity, or of dealing with the vulnerable? And maybe the other question is, do you think that the current initiatives are sufficient? Bernard just told us 80 billion allocated to those people affected. One of the questions to ask is, yes, the 80 billion, to do what exactly? How does it reach the people who have been affected the most? Are they going to get a cash handout like SAGE does? Are those initiatives sufficient, you think? At an equity level and at a vulnerability level?
I'll start with the first one. We are there to see that discrimination and inequalities are eliminated by the different ministries, departments, and agencies of government.
Do they exist?
Because the inequalities?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Is there discrimination in this country?
We wouldn't be established as the Equal Opportunities Commission. One of the reasons why we're established as the Equal Opportunities Commission is because the inequalities are there and iniquities, they are there. That one, we have no ways about it. The inequalities are there and the iniquities are there. And that's why our mandate speaks to redressing those imbalances. Issues of how they can redress or how they can come up with different ways of seeing that these imbalances or iniquities are not there is for us to look at the prevailing situation, what we have in our envelope, and how best we can look at our frameworks that are there, both policies and laws. We accrue to them, and then we plan better. I think the issue is about how we plan. The 80 billion might be there, but how are we going to plan for it?
Is anybody in government listening to you?
I pray that
from what you see.
I pray that
we next week,
yes.
After just next, no, actually, yeah, on 13th.
This week.
Yeah, this week on 13th.
Yeah, today is Sunday.
We'll have the presentation of the budget.
Yes.
45.4 trillion. When you look at the budget framework paper, do you feel that you're being listened to? Someone is listening to you and trying to redress these issues?
I'll say yes. Why? Like I said prior, the Equal Opportunities Commission under the Public Finance Management Act, we have that role of assessing the budget framework papers, the national budget, the ministerial policy statements, and the local government budget framework papers. And when I look at the budget framework papers, yes, they do plan for the vulnerable people. The monies are there, but we do have other questions we have to answer. If the monies are there, do we actually implement the way the monies are put into these documents? So I know they are listening, and I know all this happens, but our biggest question is that at the time of implementation, the 80 billion might be there. How are we going to plan for it, and who are we planning for? And that's why I said initially that we have to plan for the interests and the needs of the people. If you go to Kasese today and you see what is happening, I would love to see that the local government in Kasese, in as far as infrastructure is concerned, they've put something as an after effect of the floods. So it's how do we plan, and for who do we plan for?
Yes, Bernard, do you want to come in?
Exactly what she's saying, just build from that. You see, this country is not suffering from lack of resources. No.
What are we suffering from?
It's the way we utilize the resources. So
is it the way we utilize
yes,
the resources, or the way we allocate those resources?
Allocate and distribute the resources. And why this commission is very, very important, the Equal Opportunities Commission, is that now, apart from moving from the analyzing policy desk work papers, they need to go down and, as they are planning, to go and see actually on the ground how are the resources distributed according to different diversities that exist within our society. How much went? Because all these affirmative programs, affirmative action programs, are supposed to address particular imbalances. Even if it is Renzo region or the New South, you know, all these are affirmative. Even YLP, Youth Livelihood Program, and Women Entrepreneurship Program. Even SAGE is an affirmative program meant to address a particular group which is being not treated in a manner that would cover their social and economic risks, and they are targeted for that. So the thing is that, can you go down and get value for money to see how the resources are distributed? Unfortunately, some of the areas, as you know, the water as it starts going down, there could be some endpoints, or I don't want to call them leakages, because then if it leaks, it might not reach. But at times it can happen. It can happen. But this is where we need to strengthen. How are the resources being distributed down to the wananchi?
As I listen to the both of you,
yes,
what is running in my head is Ugandans and the circumstances in which we live. And COVID has provided the opportunity to lift the veil of some people you thought were socially secure.
Exactly.
The clamor for the posho that was being distributed in this city.
Yes, exactly.
The complaints for the bad, the bad bins, but people still wanting them.
Yes.
And waiting. So the question for me is, your ministry should be the most important ministry in this country, because
absolutely,
who is not vulnerable?
Exactly. And you saw
who
that.
Who is socially secure?
Sorry to come in quickly. And you saw that. You see, the creative economy is the most, in terms of resourcing, probably forgotten, apart from the legal and policy framework, which is very supportive. But during this time, you know, you have the presenters, you have DJs. If there's no music to be done anywhere, there's no income. If the studios are closed, everyone is closed. Even if you release a song, there's no audience for you to monetize your content. And to us, it's a huge wake-up call. So how do we focus on areas which are actually creating jobs? Creative economy and cultural industries are huge employers of this. In this
we'll come back to that. Let me come to the Uganda, to Uganda, the UBRA. Yes, Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority. I know you've been a bit in the eye of the storm. The moment we jump off from NSSF, you are the next point of stop. So we have many questions for you about our 20%. Those of us who work formal jobs, we will be asking about our 20%. But given your mandate, what have you done, since you established as an authority, what have you done to provide those safeguards for social protection and actually make social protection mean social protection? Or maybe you have a different interpretation of social protection.
Yeah, thank you, Charles, viewers and colleagues, Bernard and from the lady from the Opportunities. We've been in this journey of the reform since 2004, when the pension reform started, or the debate, when they had the stakeholders transition group. But I'm not going to that background. But what I would wish to say is that the drivers of all this, while the broader perspective is social protection, as rightly stated, which attempts to address the vulnerabilities in our societies and the sectors we serve, the social protection mandate, or the area or the component of social protection that is being catered for under the OBRA Act, is the old age poverty. Of course, there are others, and a mirror of kind of unemployment, which is the withdrawal benefit under NSSF Act. But still, those are supplementaries. I think the fundamental point would be who has the primary responsibility to provide social protection to the society. Literature has it, it's supposed to be the state, the government. So whatever interventions we are doing as an authority and any other schemes that we have is a supplementary, is an addition to what the foundation is supposed to be. So what have we done in this kind of arrangement? We've set the ball rolling. The first fundamental thing is to ensure that we license and supervise all retirement benefit schemes and service providers. In order to provide the service, we regulate and supervise the operations, the administration and management. The primary objective is to protect the fund. So we are looking at the accumulated portfolio of a member, how it is invested, how it is managed, and how it is distributed. So we look at it at the three stages of that cycle. The first stage is where a member makes a contribution plus a contribution from the employer. The second phase is how the funds are accumulated through investment, prudent investment, and the final phase is how the funds are paid out. So what are you supposed to do to ensure that a member who joined the scheme at 20 is assured of his funds 35 years to come? That's the fundamental point. Of course, the risk is that we are looking at a longer period. There's a longevity risk. But besides that, we need to build trust, which we've done. We think we've done that in order to ensure that people continue to contribute, people continue, many schemes are registered in order to supplement, like I've said earlier.
How many do you have so far?
In the past, we used to know NSSF only. Today we have 68 schemes.
68
schemes, retirement benefit schemes, including NSSF. And NSSF is the giant, of course, accounting for 13 trillion. The other 67 have 2 trillion, but that has been accumulated in the last 6 years or 7 years. So the momentum is high.
So if you have 67, how many people would you confidently say are enrolled in these 67 schemes?
Well, I would say the number of people are around 2.2, but the risk in just stating that figure is that those who are under those 67 schemes, which we call occupational schemes, are also members of NSSF. So if you don't separate the two, you are risking double
counting.
You are risking double counting. But the numbers are there about 2.2 million people. But we are looking at a huge population, the working population. I don't know whether Bernard has mentioned this, but the literature I have is around 19 million people, which is the working population. But only 2.2 or less than 2.5 are catered for under the old age arrangement. So who is taking care of the other balance, which is the 16.5?
I'm coming back to you, Mr. Nsubuga, in a moment. Let me get Fred to answer that question, or maybe to hammer in that question. Who is taking care of the others? The question you just put. Fred, do we have you? Fred? Do I have Fred on Zoom?
Yes, I have you.
Yes, Fred, you just had Mr. Nsubuga's question. And the group the group you represent. This question of providing for old age, providing for social protection, because that is the whole debate out there now. Who needs social protection at this age?
When we talk about social protection, at the moment, as the minister also has alluded, and also the commissioner, you see that there are various categories. But let me particularly talk for the category of the older persons. This time round is where we actually, our older persons need social protection more than ever before. Because you realize that social protection measures now are becoming more critical at this particular moment, more than before. Look at issues of older persons. Once they become older, issues like health complications start setting in. We have right now, I'll talk about 3 categories of older persons. We have older persons who worked in the government, for example, and are getting a pension. We have those who are now depending on social assistance grant. And we have those who are getting through NSSF. Now, we consider that this is the time that we need to look at them. And COVID has brought in some complications in that. For example, the commission has just been mentioning that we have a program called the Social Assistance Grant. If you would look back, we realize that it was, for some time, it has been suspended, and the ministry is just coming now back to go and start supporting the older persons. And yet, you would wonder now what has been happening in between here. What has been happening to our older persons? You know, just news that it has been suspended has a potential of making someone, if it's ailments, they become more sick. What ailments are we talking about? You know, older persons, as you continue growing older, the complications like non-communicable disease set in, disabilities set in, and imagine someone who has pressure and then he gets information that we've suspended it for some time. Some countries, by the way, have done this. Congo also has done the same. In terms of, they had suspended at first. But I thank the government of Uganda that there's now, out there, they have said they're now going to be supporting older persons. So I still maintain and say that, yes, the youth need it, the children need it, but this is the time that older persons need it even more than before. I don't know if I've kind of...
Yes, you do. Thank you, Fred. Let me come back to Mr. Nsubuga here. So, about 2.2 million, that's the enrollment for NSSF. There is only 1.2 that is active, meaning that these ones are consistently putting in their money, the active savers. Yes. I think the NSSF calculates the active ones on people who have put in a saving in the last 3 months.
Active once every year, on average.
Yes, on average, once every year. But there's been this clamor. If I didn't ask you this question, I would be in trouble. What is your position as UBRA on the clamor for midterm access?
Well, first and foremost, you need to look at it from two perspectives. The first perspective, there is midterm access on known social security issues, which are provided for, like for a mortgage, ill health. That is already catered for in the UBRA Act. But there is also this access. I don't want to call it midterm access. It is more of a short-term intervention of some sort, where people are agitating for some funds in this situation of COVID. Our position has been clear, is that the first issue is that it's not provided for in the Act. Of course, when I say that, many people have told me I'm being arrogant, I'm not being concerned, I'm not sympathetic, but we share the same plight with the members of NSSF, because I'm also a member. But the fact remains that the framers of the Act at that point in time never envisaged a situation like this. That's point number one. Number two, even if we
Which is actually a little bit strange, because if you look at life expectancy of Ugandans, I know there's a debate about life expectancy at birth, but if you look at life expectancy, and the Act said a qualified access, age benefit, age access is 55 years and above.
Yes, under NSSF.
We've just crossed that level of life expectancy. Even the definition of who is an older person in this country has been shifting progressively, and the law has been static at some level. So when people say you're being arrogant, and I think Richard Vyarugaba was being eaten alive on social media for the arrogant tone of his letter, it's understandable where that is coming from. People are saying, wait a minute, you have 6 windows through which I can access my money in NSSF. I either get a permanent disability, then I can access it before the age, or a permanent an ailment that is terminal in nature. So you have cancer, you have, I think, HIV, AIDS, and a few others. Then you can access the money. Or I am migrating to a different country permanently. Then I can access the money. Or I am crossing employment
to another entity,
especially government, that has a provision for retirement.
Correct.
Or I am dead, which means the money doesn't belong to me. And I think most Ugandans look at that one and say, this is actually not my money. It is money for the other people I leave behind. People asking, why wouldn't you say, if I've been saving and I have, and then most of the people who are borrowing, who are accessing this money are running maybe to build their first house. They are still running to pay school fees, either for their own children or for dependents. So does it actually provide the retirement benefit it is supposed to provide, in your view, if it is accessed primarily through age qualification?
From the 6 you've listed, the first 3 are categorized as part of the ILO convention social security requirements. Old age, partial unemployment, which we call withdrawal benefit, but it is not really unemployment. It's only because it's determined by age, 50 years, and survivor's benefit, where you've rightly stated when you die, the money is passed on to the other beneficiaries. But the issue here is that we think, or the framers of the law, we are of the view that a person is continuing to serve, to work, an accumulation of wealth. Number 2, that person is only demanded to make a small contribution out of that pool he's earning. Only 5%. The other 95% stay with it. But as a motivating factor, the employer also makes an additional 10% in order to encourage you to save. But they don't stop you to contribute more. There are very many platforms in this country where you can save even more for your retirement. We don't take advantage of them. Now, the idea here is that that fund was earmarked for a particular purpose, old age poverty, and also support the beneficiaries or the survivors when God calls you, such that they don't live in this, you don't live a miserable family as you die, or when you live, you need to live a dignified. I've heard this word, dignified retirement. I've heard that word from the minister's speech, from Benedict's submission. That was the idea, the objective. The principle here is that they leave you room as a person to plan. But what we are realizing, and I think it's a wake-up call, is that, you know what, even when you allow people to save some money, the mandatory saving, they actually don't save any additional money. Now, can we encourage people to save more? If we are encouraging them to save more, can we start to think about mandatory savings for any other benefits that can be in that line?
I want the other panelists and Fred to come in here. Is it voluntary that people are unable to have any other savings apart from money they are by law required to save with NSSF, for example? I'd be happy to hear from you at WUBRA. What kind of studies have you done? And COVID presents that opportunity. You have a population of 40 million Ugandans. Is it 40 or 45, Bernard? 42 million. So 42 million Ugandans. Out of that, employable Ugandans, those who qualify to get some kind of employment, is it about 15 million, 16?
16.
About 16 million Ugandans. Out of that 16 million Ugandans, you have only 2.2 million
who are covered.
Yes. By a mandatory saving scheme. Out of that 2.2 million, you have 1.2 million Ugandans that are actively saving. And an active saver includes a person who is able to make a deposit of 1 month in 12 months, in a year. Out of that, you have at qualification, because of the intermittent nature of savings, the instability of jobs, the inconsistency of being employed. At the time someone comes to claim their benefit, 97% can only take home, on average, 13 million shillings. That is about $3,000. Now, if someone was receiving 13 million shillings after 55, I'm wondering what they can really do, because with 13 million shillings, you can't build a house, a decent house, because we're talking about dignified retirement. If you're paying school fees, I don't know how much you'd sustain and pay that. If you're catering for old age health-related issues, so the entire country is vulnerable. And I'm wondering what kind of studies you have maybe undertaken at Hubra to say, what is at the root cause of this? What is the actual problem? Because the problem may not be that people don't want to save.
Well, it's, you know, I would say that at the end of the day, the saving culture is poor. Like, I mean, believe it or not, even if people are vulnerable, the saving culture is poor. The mandatory people we've talked about, if they don't have the mandatory contributions to NSSF, what else do they have? Probably nothing. But is it that they wouldn't be able to save? Because when you talk of 13 million to date, I mean at the time of retirement, and you've been working, say, for 20 years, it means you've not been earning much, which is a fact. Now, but irrespective
you've not been earning much, you've not been earning consistently.
That is true, yes. But irrespective of that, have you attempted to have an additional saving? It may not be in a bank account. It may not be in because people tend to relate savings to a monetary investment of some sort. It could be a plantation of coffee, a plantation of bananas.
The president was talking about his cows.
Do we have that? Because at the end of the day, if you think that the entire your entire retirement would be sustained by that money, and I think that's where we go wrong, because we are talking of an amount that mirrors what has been your income. If you've been having a cash flow or an income that has been generous, you are definitely expecting to have and some.
Let me throw this across, because I have only government people in here apart from Fred. You've done this study, you have this appreciation of what the challenge is. I don't know if actually it has been done, because the things Sylvia is dealing with at the Equal Opportunities Commission are exactly those. The things you're dealing with at the ministry are exactly those. What is the problem and how do you get to solve it?
From my own perspective, then I can allow my chairperson to make her own intervention. It is that, you see, Charles, and again, it is, you know, the sector even which we are focusing on is a minimal sector in terms of participating labor force in the economy. The informal sector alone has over 13 million workers who are not tapped, they're just there. And some of these people earn much better. I can tell you, Charles, you don't earn better than someone who owns a garage on downtown. You know, but they are not in any of these schemes and they're earning. But they are not. So they are excluded from participating. And so we are here fighting within the small, you know, calabash, like grasshoppers, when the larger, you know, field is full. And we must come up with measures to make sure that we become inclusive in opening up the saving culture or the framework for social protection, and therefore for some of these schemes. How do you make them more accessible for to the vulnerable groups? It is just the way we think about, and two, it's not so much about income poor, because people became pressurized because of, you know, not having immediate cash and the worries for education, not having good education because it is overly priced probably, and also a healthcare system, you know, a lot of money. If you have had a patient at home, you know how much resources have gone to healthcare and the hospitals and the way they bill you. Actually, they hold, you saw incidences where people have been, you know, corpses have been grabbed into the mortuary until when you pay the bills. So, and you have to liquidate the little assets. So it's about also the investment options that go along with social saving schemes. It's not just the one thing. And so we are saying, I will give you an example. People who so many people went into tree farming, isn't it? They planted trees, but do you know that you cannot easily monetize your trees until when they mature, which is 20 years? But in other countries, the moment they come and see your trees, this is the resource. It's a sure deal. The money will come 20 years. So they give you a collateral, a certificate of ownership, property. You can use it. Who should be leading
that discussion? Because we're talking
this is beyond, where we are going.
We're talking beyond COVID-19. The theme for this e-conference is beyond COVID-19, assessing social protection in Uganda.
And,
Sylvia will tell you here that in the last 2.5 months, this is the 81st day since we went into lockdown. About 81 days into lockdown.
We lost counting.
Eh?
Yeah,
because I think when the president was speaking, it was 78 days plus an extra 4 days, an extra 5 days. We're about 81, 82 days into lockdown. And your numbers have significantly shifted. The people we assumed were secure are not secure. The people we thought were insecure are possibly faring a little bit better. But if you told Ugandans, some of those who live around the central here, or urban areas, wherever you locate them, you have a window, walk back home, they walk back home, because they think that provides more social security. So I'm wondering, in terms of government policy, what is being done to ensure, whether it's at UBRA level, or it is at Equal Opportunities Commission or the ministry, what kind of interventions, how are you taking advantage? That's the word you use. That the opportunity COVID-19 presents to redress issues of social protection and vulnerability.
I think right now we have to go back to our policies. When you look at the social protection policy, if it was followed during implementation, during the coming into force of the different acts, we would be in a better place. But when you look at the policy and what is being done, they are quite different. That's why at this moment you're only hearing about social security and not hearing about the other bit of social protection. I think we have to go back to our policy. You've heard this, Charles, when people are talking about the good laws, the good policies, and we stop there. I think we have to go back to our policies, look at them, what exactly did we enumerate in those policies, and how are we implementing? Because there's a very big gap there. When you look at our policy, it talks about the involvement of families when we are talking about social protection. If you go back to all these programs that are being talked about in the ministry, how much of family was involved? How much of the target groups were involved? Maybe at this point, for example, the informal sector, we would already know that what is in the informal sector is also too big and we can't miss them. But because when we are doing these things, we don't involve them, we don't follow these policies to the letter. We make the policies, launch them, sometimes go ahead and do things that do not speak. Yes, but when you look at this social protection policy, if you see what we have to do, for example, is there inclusiveness in these programs? When they were developing SAGE, when they were developing the Youth Lively program, is there inclusiveness? Is there universality? You see, so for me, when I look at the policy and what the practices are, it's a little bit different. So we have to go back and redefine what our policies are vis-a-vis what we are doing on the ground. It might give us a different approach.
Yes, Mr. Nsubuga.
Well, I appreciate Sylvia's submission here. She really brings out the different interventions of social protection. You're looking at the children, you're looking at the youth, even the disabled people, the gender, etc. Now, the mistake that is happening in this country is to assume that the solution for social security in this country, or social protection, at least some literature interchanges the two, is the NSSF, which is a very big mistake. Because NSSF, like I said earlier, is just a supplement. There must be a primary foundation for social protection in this country. And Sylvia has rightly stated, there's a policy framework. There's a guiding principle. Now, what we cut out, because the OBRA Act is a 2011 Act, the Social Protection Policy is a 2015 policy. The OBRA Act was already in place. But the principles of social protection are there, but as I rightly stated, they're only addressing just a small component. But what have we done to encompass a bigger scope of audience. You've realized that yes, we cannot target on or look at only the 2.5 population we are looking at, but there's a wider population that is employed, but in the informal sector.
Yeah, I hear you, Mr. Nsubuga.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And we've already crafted a framework that we are going to roll over, not even to roll over, but we are going to incorporate our stakeholders to help us pursue that. What we need to do is, while we have a framework for the formal sector, we need another framework for the informal sector, which is unique.
Let me bring in someone from one of those groups that are defined as vulnerable without debate, people with disabilities. So I have Rose Achayo, Chair of the National Union of Women with Disabilities in Uganda, Nuwodu. Rose, do I have you?
Yes, please, Charles.
Yes, please come in. I hope you've been watching the conference and following the discussions. Where do the persons with disabilities, and allow me to be very specific, women with disabilities, because I think the challenges are slightly different between women and men with disabilities, children and older people with disabilities. How do you look at this question of social protection, especially for the group that you work with and represent?
Thank you very much, Charles. I just want to appreciate this conversation, that it has come at the time when we are all struggling with the COVID-19. I want us to appreciate whatever steps government has taken, though as persons with disabilities, we really still need more effort to be put. For example, when the government is talking about the special grant, we need to understand where these special grants came from. And now, because the persons with disabilities were being employed by the private sector, the government realized that they were actually losing out a lot of money in terms of taxes. So the people who have been coming out of the university do not have jobs. And because of that, the government then said, let us come out with a special grant. Now, I want to agree with the chairperson of the Equal Opportunities Commission in terms of planning and in terms of budgeting. When we look at the money, the special grant that the government is giving persons with disabilities, honestly, this money goes to the people. For example, in a quarter, this money is given to a district according to the sub-county. If, like, for example, the money is given in Kuru district, and in first quarter they are giving you 2 million, what can 2 million do for a group of persons with disabilities? And in most cases, the women with disabilities actually suffer the most because of the gender gap. Because when they are writing these proposals, the proposals are targeting what is it that these people want to do. For example, with that 2 million. And that 2 million is supposed to maybe be for both rearing. And the comparing how long will it take for this person with disabilities to start earning from that both rearing. So this then brings in a very big challenge in terms of promoting equality, but also in terms of getting the income of these women with disabilities.
Thank you.
Because most of the women with disabilities are actually single mothers. And these women cater for the food of their children, the food in the house, the health care services. It's a burden to these women with disabilities.
Thank you, Rose.
And I think, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rose. Can you just conclude your thought there?
So what we are saying, that the social protection government needs to rethink that if people are benefiting from the social protection, persons with disabilities are actually hit hard. Because even as we speak now, their income has evaporated. Many of them are living without food. needs to rethink on how best to support women or participants in social protection.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rose. We need to end this show. I didn't inform our viewers and the people following us that we are having two panels, so I'm going to have to replace this panel with another panel, but I'd like to offer each one of you, starting with Fred, an opportunity to make some concluding remarks. And I think people also, people are following the discussion, and they sent some comments. Someone says we should encourage everybody, you in studio and the people watching us and following this discussion, to read the paper titled Real Economy versus Vulnerable Economy by His Excellency the President. That's a message from Colonel James Nkojo. Also, there is a paper on post-COVID realities by General Salim Saleh that he says we need to read and familiarize ourselves with. Another person here says, okay, is following the discussion. Fred. Okay, let me start here. Mr. Nsubuga, I didn't offer you an opportunity to conclude this. So, tell us, do you think people should get their 20% or not?
No, I think I've guided on,
yes.
I've guided on that. While the principle is good to support the people who are vulnerable, the idea is not right, because the money that has been accumulated was for a different purpose. So if you do it down now, it will affect the long-term objective. So what's the long-term objective of this money is for your old age poverty. You do it now, there's an opportunity cost.
The challenge, Mr. Nsubuga, is even NSSF in its own studies has found that majority of the people who get this money, when they qualify for it, it has been blown within 2 years. Number two is at a figure of 2.2 million, 2.2 or 2.5 million savers spread across. You're actually running through the same category of people who have some level of protection. It is the person who has NSSF savings, who is likely to take out insurance, who is likely to save with a SACCO at the workplace where, the place where they work, who is likely to be part of another saving scheme, a merry-go-round that gives them some money. If you have that number at 2 million or less than 3 million, out of about 16 million Ugandans who should be working and supporting the other section of the population, then the trouble is much deeper, and the challenge for you at Hubra is quite immense, I would imagine.
True, it is.
Yes.
But Charles, like I've said, if there are only 2.5 people who are saving today, is it that other people don't have money to save? The informal sector people, Bernard has rightly stated, some are even earning more. Where do they save? Where do they put their money? It is our obligation as regulators to grow this sector, to put up a framework which we are building to encroach into the informal sector, to tap into that. But I just want to add two things. I think the interest of time. I think what COVID has taught us in this era is that people are likely to live longer, irrespective of what we are going through today. If we adopt the basic principles of washing hands, keeping healthy, we are likely to live longer. Yes. So that means that the life expectancy that we have of 63 years is likely to be beyond that very soon. So the issue here is that while the retirement age at NSSF is 55, just be assured that you'll actually live longer in retirement, and therefore you need to plan for that time very well.
Thank you.
The final one is I think we need to revisit the policy framework as far as the little interventions that are available. Like I said, the secondary level interventions of the occupational schemes and the NSSF Act. Can we start to think through other additional benefits going forward that can be added onto the list, that can be able to be used for such eventualities, not to draw down the money, but looking at the future.
I'm pressed for time. So Sylvia, quickly.
I have 3 things to say. And as far as social protection is concerned, we need to look at the whole framework of social protection in this country. 1, we have to start with information. Let's get the data. Who are those people who are vulnerable, and what are those situations that can make us vulnerable as people? And then we plan better. Because without this information, without data, we cannot plan properly and we cannot allocate resources properly. 2, the social protection initiatives, as you might be aware, are a little bit selective. The target groups are very few, and yet we have seen it now that we are all vulnerable. So we need to look at a bigger scope.
Okay.
3, the issue of a holistic approach. If we are to look at social protection, let's get that holistic approach, and we look at things in a more universal manner, so that we don't leave out people. That's why you see now we are talking about the formal sector and leaving out the informal and yet there are over 60.
Bernard, yes, Mr. Majuni.
Just a few policy action issues which we have already started working on. One is about the need for a comprehensive social registry to help to capture some of these vulnerabilities at community and household level, so that if you are targeting, you really target the vulnerable groups. And there's nothing like, let's look for the vulnerable, the poor, the people with disability. You know, this registry will be capturing this information from bottom-up approach planning. The other aspect is about comprehensive social risk and shocks response plan, which we have embarked on. It's a comprehensive document, and it will be guiding every stakeholder in this. The other area is about the realization that actually a right to digital information and the right to access to internet is very as important as your right to food, because people who could probably not procure online were more at a higher risk than those who could. And finally, it's about monetizing our economy. The approach of government towards the economy is shifting now towards business, pure business. And you cannot say that now we are just in charge of policy and, you know, creating environment. No, you must be one of the players and create avenues for monetizing the economy and enable the industries, including cultural and creative industries.
Thank you.
To thrive. And to us, this is the bottom line.
Thank you.
And finally,
yes,
it's the new normal about work. That productivity is no longer sitting in your office every day and causing climate change through the jam and all that. That you can sit at home, get data, and be as productive. Actually, technology has come that they can even monitor you from home. And then why do you cause traffic jam to Kampala unnecessarily?
Okay.
Work from home and be as productive.
Thank you very much. Let's get Fred to also make his concluding remark. Fred, can I have you make your concluding remark, especially on the elderly who are more vulnerable?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much, ISER. Thank you so much, NTV. My addition, I'll just point at three people or three entities. Look, for the community, right now in this during this pandemic, we have a lot of issues related to lockdown. I mean, not lockdown, but more of social distancing. But we are calling upon you to respect older persons, because these are the people who brought you up. You find a family where these two parents are the ones who brought up 12.
Fred, I need you to run through this quickly because time is against us.
The 12 cannot even look after the 2. During this time also, there's a lot of neglect. Older persons are being isolated. You know, when you look at the statistics that have been in the world, it came out that older persons are dying a lot. And if I might just point a little to, specifically for our case, they are suffering from non-communicable diseases. They need your support, you as a community. They need your support, you as the children. For the older persons, we are asking you to join groups. These groups not only just for economic gain, but also for your own psychosocial support. Then to the government, and you know, when you talk about social protection, we cannot really evade from talking about the social assistance grant of the older persons. What we are requesting is, can it be scaled up? Because at the moment, we realize that how many older persons are we supporting? The population of Uganda, the population of older persons is approximately 1.6 million. But of the 1.6 million, you'll find that around 800 of those are the ones who are actually needing the social assistance grant. Right now, the age is that for the national rollout, it is 80 years. And you know, when you look at it, it comes to, we are spending something close to between 0.25 to 3 of the GDP. But we are just requesting for 1% of the national budget to support older persons. They are very few. This cannot cost us when you calculate. Then also, some countries have done this.
Fred, time is not my best ally.
Okay, just one thing.
Yes.
Okay, two things. Lastly, issues of correcting the issues, because they are getting money through for those people who have IDs. And those who do not have IDs, can we rectify that? And finally, we have older persons who cannot now access hospitals because of the issue of transport is not so palatable to them.
Thank you.
We're asking those who have already a working relationship with them, the hospitals, can't you deliver these drugs to these people? So finally, in one sentence, I'm saying that the future of Uganda older populations is at risk if the pandemic in Uganda follows the same trajectory as in China, Italy, where the disease took hold.
Thank you.
Then we are in a danger of losing many people.
Thank you. And maybe, Fred, you need to remember.
So with those words, I want to thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
God bless you.
Thank you. Because you also be growing old very soon. So as you grow older, you need to plan for that time by looking at the old people now. Can I have Rose make her concluding remarks? Rose, I have 30 seconds for you if you're online. Okay.
Yes, Charles.
Yes, Rose.
Charles, what I am saying is that the government needs really to reconsider the issue of the income support care first, which should take care of the persons with disabilities, especially those with multiple disabilities, but also their caregivers. Because the caregivers give a lot of time to these persons with disabilities, and it doesn't allow them to do any other productive economic activities.
Thank you.
But also, too, the government needs to really increase the budget so that the persons with disabilities can be able to do some tangible income, some tangible employment, self-employment activities that can generate the money, and they are even able to do some savings for the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose.
And lastly, now that the COVID-19 has come, there is need for government to really give a booster to the persons with disabilities who have been doing businesses, because all the money that they have been having has been eaten up during this lockdown.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to thank my panel, starting with the Honorable Minister, Florence Nachiwala-Kiyingi, who joined us and gave a keynote presentation. I'd like to thank Salima. Salima is rejoining us on the next panel, so you'll hear from her, and she'll respond to many of these things because they're at ISER. That's basically what they're focusing on, advocating for social and economic rights. I'd like to thank Mr. Mujuni Bernard from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Thank you very much for making the time for us.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Sylvia Muewa Ntambi from the Equal Opportunities Commission. Thank you very much, Mr. Nsubuga from the Uganda Retirement Benefits Scheme, and Fred and Rose, thank you very much for joining us. We're discussing beyond COVID-19, assessing social protection in Uganda. We have another 1.5 hours to dig deep into this. So if you have some questions, if you'd like to comment, please reserve those, and we'll still have enough time to give you answers and tear through them. We'll take a You're still watching a NIC conference on social protection, looking at beyond COVID-19, the social protection situation in Uganda. The first panel, we had the keynote presentation from the Minister in charge of children and youth at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, the Honourable Florence Nachiwala-Kiyingi. We had opening remarks from Salima Namusobia from the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISER. We also had largely from a government panel, from the Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority, from the Equal Opportunities Commission, and from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Now, the next panel that I have, we continue discussing the same theme of this e-conference. We have some people in studio here, and I have people joining us virtually through the benefit of social media to discuss our vulnerability as a people, to discuss social protection, and how much government is doing, what it's not doing, but also as us as individuals. What is it that we need to do that we're not doing? What lessons are we learning as individuals from COVID-19? So if you run out, like the report said, 15 days, 15 days into the lockdown, majority of the people were out of any savings that they had and were beginning to scramble. Some people took had initiative, the only alternative available, to walk home. So if you come from where I come from in Toro, walking 300 kilometers to be near your garden, because those are not less vulnerable. But let's go into that discussion. I have a new panel here. So Salima, very nice to have you back. Thank you. To join us in this discussion. I have Dr. Freddy Sengoba. Dr. Freddy Sengoba is from the Makerere University School of Public Health as Associate Professor.
Thank you. Nice having you.
Very nice to have you. I have one of those people who have really been advocating, especially for the elderly persons. Former Member of Parliament. I have with me here the Honorable Flavia Kabahenda Rwabhoro, who is the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection.
Delighted to be here.
Very nice to have you here. I'll be joined online by Angela Bagaine. Angela Bagaine is she hasn't come in yet, but we'll be linking up with her possibly, from the Uganda Women's Entrepreneurs Association Limited. And we might also be joined by Mr. Patrick Katabazi from Center for Budget and Tax Policy. Patrick is already available? Yes, Patrick is here with us. Patrick, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. A pleasure is mine.
Thank you. Let me start here in studio and ask Salima to come back, because the appreciation of social protection, its understanding. If you're watching the panel that I had largely from government officials, I don't think that even in government itself it's clear what is social protection, what is vulnerability. Can you help me understand this and the audience following us?
Okay, just like I said during my earlier remarks, social protection, it is a set of interventions. It is a comprehensive set of interventions that seeks to provide, that seeks to cushion individuals from the shocks that they may get resulting from various disasters. And I gave examples that are happening to us, COVID-19. I gave the example of the floods. I gave the example of the drought, the locust invasion. So government has the responsibility to ensure that at times like this, people are cushioned from the shocks that happen. Many cases, those shocks are in the form of downtown in income. You see that people suddenly lost jobs. You see that suddenly people lose their social welfare. And the kind of social welfare that they have, for example, resulting from associating with their families and clans, are broken all of a sudden. Housing is broken. Healthcare, you saw that when COVID happened and the lockdown had to happen, many people were stranded. They could not get to hospitals, but also payment for the healthcare. So it is a broad range of things that government needs to put in place such that people do not become destitute when they get the shocks that result from sudden incidences that it did not occur. But the other angle is also what is foreseen. For example, in the case of the elderly persons, older persons, you anticipate that at a certain point in time, somebody will not be productive as they were before. So you have to prepare for that time and ensure that you're protecting these people and enabling them to live a life of dignity as they age, because before they are aging, they were able to productively contribute to the country. But lastly, there is the group, the vulnerable groups, for example, children, orphans and vulnerable children, but also there are groups like persons with disabilities that face very many barriers in terms of being able to live productively because of the way systems are set up, and end up discriminating or excluding them in various respects. So for those groups, there has to be something already providing for them to ensure that they are able to access social services to the same extent that the rest of us are accessing them. But very important to discuss at this point are the shocks that happen suddenly, that we have seen happen, for example, with COVID-19. And these shocks are usually in the immediate term, in the medium term, and in the longer term. That is why we need to have this conversation, because we have to be ready. We have to be ready for when these things happen, which doesn't seem, which isn't the case for what has happened to us. For example, with COVID-19, we found ourselves in a situation where we only have, for example, 2% of Ugandans covered by Social Security. We had only 2% of people covered by health insurance. And you find that we were just troubleshooting when the pandemic happened, which should not be the case. We have to be more proactive in terms of putting these mechanisms in place. And this seems like a hard task, but it is an obligation by the state. As Ugandans, we have a social contract with the state. Before I even talk about, for example, the human rights, where people have, for example, a right to have decent housing, to have, for example, access to healthcare, access to continued education. People elect governments to be able to provide these services at a time when they are needed. So you find that before COVID-19, for example, Ugandans were catering for themselves to a large extent. And when this sudden change happened, the government needs to step in. But there are various gaps. I hope you will give me the time to really go into the gaps that in our social protection system that need to be fixed in order for us to have a comprehensive program that is able to respond to these sudden emergencies when they happen and enable people to deal with the vulnerabilities and be able to continue to live a dignified life.
Thank you. I need to introduce my colleague Susan Mojawa, who's providing sign language interpretation for that section of our viewers this afternoon. So thank you, Susan. I want to go to Makerere and ask, and I made to understand Angela Bagene is with us online. Angela, do I have? Yes, Angela. Can you say hello to our people following us on this e-conference?
Good afternoon, viewers. I'm happy to be here, talk about social protection, especially for women entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will ask if women entrepreneurs have not been laying off people or sending people into redundancy, reducing salaries, and what that means. What kind of social protections exist? Ubra was telling us here that you have 67 schemes for retirement benefits, but you still have 2.2 million people registered on these schemes. So from Makerere University, tell us, who is actually socially secure as we speak, and what lends to this very high level of vulnerability? Government statistics, I think Salima was talking about them earlier. There's that World Bank report, but you know that at any one time, about 8 million Ugandans are characterized as extremely poor, live in extreme poverty. You have another about 1.2 million that are teetering. 2.6.
Bank talks of 10.
Yes. Those numbers, you're talking about a person who is earning slightly above $2 a day, living on, not earning, living on slightly above $2 a day. That's about 7,000 shillings today at today's exchange rate, 7,000, maybe 8,000 shillings a day. But that bulk of people who will fall off the cliff if anything shook them up a little. The advantage with COVID-19 is that it has told us, even those of us who thought we were secure, are all of a sudden finding us, 15 days you're out. And that is when you're lucky that your employer paid you for that month. So you are the one in academics, tell us.
Thanks, Charles.
Yes.
Good evening, viewers, because I don't want to claim to be Makerere myself.
Yes.
I'm just Fred Sengova, who is an employee of the university. But I'm also not an economist, but as a public health expert, I can at least contribute the coin's worth of the question you put. It's a very large question.
Yes.
In a sense that we are living in a situation which is abnormal. We have to acknowledge that. It is not the normal environment where individuals, especially those who are privileged to have decent and gainful employment, help themselves so they become self-sufficient. But at times like these, when the economy, for example, has to be frozen in order to achieve greater good, or at least protect the public's health, then those frameworks of self or individual support crumble, as you said, within 2 weeks, where people are really earning hand to mouth, as the president puts it. Although it's not just the borders, even those in public service, if you look at by the end of the month, they've already borrowed out all their salaries. So,
and teachers in private schools,
exactly,
who are supposed to be part of that exclusive category.
Yes.
Eh?
Yeah. So even those that are really employed, they are not gainfully employed. So we are all living on the margin, especially when COVID-like shocks arrive. And in that environment, we find all ourselves really going to the insurance of last resort, which is what my colleague has just been explaining. Government is in place as an insurer for all of us, and every nation looks to its government for insurance. But also, this goes with the fact that we are referred to as, is it called low-income countries or third? Something that is that categorization that we are not in the first world, meaning that within the resources we can generate and therefore use those to provide for our people, we have a constraint. So in every right, in every entitlement, in every provision, even in health, you find that even the Constitution doesn't want to define clearly what we're entitled to. They say to the extent practicable, the government will. And that is usually a challenge of trying to say, where is the state in terms of its resource profile vis-a-vis the needs of its population? And as a country, we can ask and say, do we have really enough? The last, I think, panel, it was said that money is not a problem. I would wish that was true, but I believe that if you are to deal with all the health issues, just look at testing for COVID. It is the test itself and serving a small group, for example, the trucks, is very hard for us to get. Partly because it costs a lot of money, although people out there may disagree, but also getting it from the global market is not easy. Even rich countries can't get it. And that tells you we are living in unique times. Even the rich people now are vulnerable.
But Professor, do you think...
The Americans, let me just finish a little bit. The Americans now, when you listen to your discourse for COVID, they are literally pulled out all trillions and trillions to try to get back to, but they can't get enough.
They are going through their third stimulus
Uganda,
package,
we wish we had something also big enough and able to trickle down. But this tells you that we are in a unique situation, but definitely have to be looking to government. And I think this moment teaches us something. We should start to engage government. Government is all of us, to start to plan how best can we plan for shocks. I want to share a small example from China. China has food banks. When they were hit by COVID, they didn't look around for food scavenging like some states. In Uganda, we are lucky we have somehow some food security. But when you go to China, they have actually food banks that can take them years taking care of. That tells you that the state is planning for eventualities. We need to start thinking like that, because these needs and these shocks are just going to be coming. How do we face the next one better prepared, I think, is the issue why this talk is here today.
Professor, let me stay with you a little bit. I know I will be coming to questions of public health, issues of public health, because the two dimensions to COVID-19 and social vulnerability is on health, as we know it, and public health. And I mean vulnerabilities that deal with can we survive on social protection issues. But let me just stay a little bit on the economics question. Do you think that, and this is a largely developing countries problem, our definition of our vulnerability as poor people, as poor countries, does it in a way help governments especially, and us as individuals, shirk our own responsibility to plan better for our lives? Because the other panel told you, money is not necessarily the problem. Its allocation, its distribution, its utilization might be bigger problems than it is. You're talking about the question of food banks. In this country, we are lucky because food is available. But how do you move that food from one point to another? How do you preserve a high yield season like we have? You have a lot of matoke, coming from all over the country. You have a lot of Irish potatoes, you have sweet potatoes, you have cassava, you have everything. By the next shock, which may not be COVID-19, which might be a drought, might be a flood, like we're having them in some parts of the country, there is no food in certain parts of the country. Now, what is the problem there? Where are we locked to deal with this question of social protection?
So I think the question could be simply if the food is available in one part of the country and is not available in the other part. Definitely there's a planning and distribution and logistics issue that need to be put in place. But also we really needed to ask ourselves whether we are selling off much of what we need also to keep for ourselves. I also know that many of these trucks that are now being stuck, they are bringing in rice from outside. So although we are food secure, we also are importing a lot of food stuff. But the point is, we need to step up from some comfort zone and start to be more able to look forward and say, what if a situation like this recurs? Because we didn't plan for it now, but the next one should find us in a way that we can even tell how do we deal with transport. I'm glad the president is already addressing the issue of railway transport. It's like it, but this has been around, even the gauge has been stalled for a while. The point is that sometimes events like this are good in a way of telling you that there are some things you need to really do faster and get more prepared. We also know that we give food to the rest of the region. A lot of our food go to Kenya, go to South Sudan and beyond. But we should be asking ourselves, at least before we start to sell, can we see the food banks and get a sense of what is there and how far can it take us? So that we don't find ourselves in this situation. People are trying to scavenge for beans. They're finding beans that are already spoiled, but that is what is available. That shouldn't be the situation.
Does an approach that puts this responsibility, I mean the government policy, to allow the private sector to take care of this, because government silos are dry, if they exist. Private silos might have something, but you saw at the beginning of the procurement for COVID-19, the crisis that we ended up in, relying on the private sector. Where does this place primary responsibility? Because someone should be converting all these matoke into a preservable form to enable you one thing, distribute it to where it's not available, but also have it for a rainy day. But now matoke is being plowed back into the garden, rotting in the plantations because it can't move to where it needs to be moved. If you find it in Kampala now, you can buy a bunch at 10,000 shillings, which was unheard of a few years ago during normal times. Now it's abnormal times. So even the farmer is vulnerable now because of that challenge.
So, and Uganda is not alone in this. I think the whole world has been so marketized, and we've been really looking at how global supply systems should be given all the support they need, and you don't produce it if you can get it cheap from China. I think all these economic thinking now has come on its head, because many of the things that we thought would be coming to us, especially in terms of health, and I want to speak more about health products right now, because this is when we need a lot of them. And all of the countries that are producing them don't want to sell them to any other country.
Because they need them.
Because they need them most. Everyone is holding the stock to serve their own. Now, Uganda, who has no industry for many of these things, we are stuck. Trucks are in the line for, 20 kilometers, because we can never get enough kits. They can't be produced that quickly. And I think this starts to tell us that any country should look at which are the vulnerable aspects of its population, and I think that is the issue we are discussing today, and provide that protection.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a moment. I need to go to Honorable Rwabhoro, and then I have the two people online because the Zoom limits. We'll take them off. I have three actually online. Honorable, let me ask, from your time in Parliament as a legislator, and now at the Parliament Social Protection Forum, my question to you is, reflecting on lessons from COVID-19, what should social protection, an ideal social protection policy and scheme look like?
Yeah, you see, Charles, allow me to start like this, that this COVID-19 has actually taught us some swift and valuable truths on social protection. that even government can be poor, to the extent that in their silos there is nothing, and all they have to resort to is the other dirty bins and all that we saw. And that whoever thought were stable are now facing the reality that actually that was not truth. And therefore the simplistic dichotomy that we were using to define poor and non-poor, and even for that to inform our social policies, was wrong. Because even the safety nets that the government thought was putting are now irrelevant. They can't work because they are not even there. They are not available to catch people as they fall into poverty. So it is a whole broken thing. Therefore, we need to redefine, have a relook even at the national social protection policy itself. It is very inadequate in many things. Good enough, it is clocking 5 years and it is due for review. I think this is the time when we should sit and really look, redefine shocks, redefine poor and non-poor, redefine risks, redefine vulnerability, redefine targeting, and then our responses will be realistic.
Thank you.
But what government needs to do today, first of all, the universities and high institutions of learning have not provided enough scholarship on political economy, on social protection. Even when evidence is glaring that politics plays a central role in this social protection. I think Makerere should take this up, and any other institutions of learning. And then the second thing is that government needs to create a system, because government cannot afford to keep patting on people's backs, people who are crying. We are dying of hunger, we are dying of this, we are dying of income, we are dying of whatever, and then government is simply patting on their backs. I think there needs to be a very developed system, appropriately equipped, empowered, that has, one of the previous panelists was talking of a holistic, but me, I'm looking at a life cycle. Because from birth to death, all those levels, we continue to face vulnerabilities. And therefore, the system must take care of all that throughout the life cycle, to the extent that each institution that employs or offers labor takes care of that. I want to give an example, very simple. We have border riders who are institutionalized, Safe Border, Tugende and all that. But ask yourself whether government has even found time to reach out to these institutions as to ensure that these border cyclists, in case they fail into any kind of shock, there is something that is in their bag. Because this can be got from what they earn. This is where we can have them declare their earnings and then have something to save for their shocks. And even if they got an accident, they would just simply know the bill will be picked. But if everything is going to be left because of liberalization, and then the role of the state is not anywhere, then I think government is just failing us. Because for us, what we are looking at is, we wouldn't even hear cries of food, we wouldn't even hear cries of people losing income, but everyone now would be looking at what they saved. Secondly, we are looking at the 67 institutions that are saving for retirement. But I want to tell you, Uganda has a partly favorably resilient community. Why? That they have their VSLAs. They are still operating, and people have been saving.
VSLAs mean village
the
savings.
Village savings and loan schemes. They are saving, they are getting their money. These VSLAs have catered for some of the very critical needs of the people in the villages. They did not even wait for government, because they waited and government was not there. So they decided to work on themselves with the few resources that they had, and then they get out what they want. Thirdly, is for government to use the per capita model of rating development in the country, or growth for that matter. Because you want to tell me that if my head is in the fridge and my legs are in a furnace, therefore I'm living fairly well, do you want to tell me that? Because what do you mean by that per capita? Because per capita is looking at the amassed wealth of the rich and distributing it virtually, actually, to the poor, as to say we are growing when that does not transform into people's livelihoods and survival with dignity. Actually, if you are buying a bunch of matoke at 10,000 here in Kampala, for me in Kyegegwa yesterday I bought a bunch, the biggest bunch, at 2,000, just 2,000. And we ask ourselves, really, is there anything we can do with this food? Because we had a bumper in January, which crossed us into March. Now another bumper of June to August has come in, and therefore there is a lot of food, and the only thing that government would do would come to these bumpers and find a way of either adding value or redistributing and level this ground.
Yeah, you see what the example you're giving of matoke, 2,000, 3,000 is the farm gate price for matoke in the matoke producing areas. In the milk producing areas, a litre is going for 300, 200 shillings because there is a higher production. But what that means is if somebody was investing a little of their savings into that as a side income, they are becoming even more vulnerable because they can't fall back on that to survive. And I would just imagine if government hadn't also gone on a begging spree for food aid during this COVID, how much the crisis would have been if all those people who have been distributing on their own in the countryside, in Toro Kingdom went and distributed some food, Uganda was distributing, providing some food. If you hadn't gone on that begging spree and contributions, would the government have had the necessary reservoirs to provide the food to those who needed it?
It wouldn't, because actually the next thing, Charles, that we learn from this COVID-19 is that our communities are actually there and ready to step in, because it was just an announcement on radio and the district headquarters were flooded with food.
Yes.
Up to now, Kyegegwa, the matoke is just ripening because people are continuing to bring so that the poor can feed. If
it wasn't for SOPs on how to distribute it, maybe the food would have gone. Let me get in Angela, who's following us virtually. And I need to announce
but at the same time, Charles,
can I come back to this panel inside here? Let me first get these people on virtual joining us, because we also have Bernard Mujuni still with us from the ministry, so he'll be rejoining us. Angela, do I have you?
Yes, you do.
Yes, Angela, reflecting on Uganda's social protection framework and what you have had the panelists here say, as an informal sector worker and also a woman, what are your views on how to safeguard social protection?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, representing Uganda Women Entrepreneurs. The social protection policy is in existence, and we know about it as the private sector. However, its reach has not been as strong as we would like it to be. I was quite interested in some of the discussions earlier, especially regarding pre-retirement and retirement benefits. We are talking about the informal sector largely when we talk about the entrepreneurs, and many of them are left out of many aspects to do with social protection. Let's take a case scenario of one category of women who retire and get into the business world. They enter an industry or a sector that they hardly know much about, and there's an assumption that their entry into the private sector, into trade, into farming, will be helped or enabled by their skills that they've used while working in their younger or heydays. And as I was listening to the discussions, I was hearing mention of defined contribution schemes, retirement benefit schemes. We are not preparing women well enough for retirement. That's one category. I'm also interested in the informal sector that has never been formalized. These have absolutely no reach within any of these defined schemes. And therefore, if we're looking at social protection, we need to understand that 90% of our production sector is informal. And that 90% are women. And these women work with their children. Social protection.
Angela, we're losing you a little.
That women and children and know what they is. We've been talking about risk mitigation, and we are not looking at who requires what in each sector. Women entrepreneurs have been resilient. I agree with Honorable on that. They've been very resilient, especially during COVID. And now they have an excess without a market with which to reach their audience to be able to sell their goods. But we're not looking at the backyard. Who is actually in production? There are many aspects in social protection that right now would be coming to the fore. With children out of school, we find that many who are in the rural areas are going to the garden. While we have schools in Kampala that are doing online work and doing homework and continuing with their syllabus in a digitized manner, we do have unpaid care going on in the rest of the community. So what are we looking for when we say social protection? The policies are in place, the implementation is questionable. And because it's questionable, we need to revisit. We have an opportunity now to rethink the way we do many of the things. I want the two parties to come together, government and private sector. The largest percentage of our population is private sector and a greater chunk is informal. We therefore need to have all players, all stakeholders raise their voice on how social protection can be carried out. When we look at cross-border traders, women especially, we find that the men are trading in the more expensive and items that will earn a bigger income. When we look at women, they are trading in plastics and food stuff, which leaves zero or limited profit margin. The men are making more on a profit margin. So gender-sensitive issues are definitely prevailing. What are our coping strategies? The factories we are looking at are employing many women, true, but at what level? At the lowest level. So is there social protection on who enters what sector? Training takes a very big chunk. And if we have an empowered women category in business, we are sure to raise the GDP of our economy and also make people self-reliant. Now, how do we do that? We've been working with women in our association, and we've been reaching them on capacity building. But there are certain things that are having an impact. Let's take an example of somebody who's into grinding groundnuts for packaging or making fruit, turning fruit into pulp. When we look at some of the things they're doing, they're also hampered by lack of social protection laws on the quality of machinery they're using. Someone buys a heavy-duty grinder or supposedly a heavy-duty grinder today, tomorrow it has broken down because we are allowing a lot of cheap and non-conforming machinery onto the market. When we look at the quality of produce, a woman will put her entire profit into her business on the hope that this profit will bring return, which she can then re-inject into the business. During COVID, we've seen many women redistributing their profit into many areas, redistributing profit into caring for the elderly, caring for children, because children are home and the costs really go high when children are home. And at the same time, there's been a lot of gender-based violence. From our research, we found that some men were not able to cope with isolation and the lockdown, and therefore were turning onto the women to bring in the money, but at the same time take care of the home. So we are finding that priorities are changing completely, and we need to reconfigure to base our social protection laws and policies into actionable implementation.
Thank you, Angela.
To be able to do that, we need to ask ourselves, who are the highly influential community leaders? These are the ones who actually know what's going on. Sometimes we take for granted the village gossip or the village talk, but when we have those Luchikos meeting, we actually get to know which areas require social protection. Then how do we identify these sectors? We are able to identify them by going on the ground. But the question is, does government have the capacity to reach the rural woman? Does the government have the capacity to give the right program to the right woman? The social assistance grants are there, but they come in very small amounts. You have a grant coming, giving an entire women's group 2 million shillings. But the 2 million shillings, when it's split among 20 women, cannot do much. So practicality, the information is there. You can get it from women associations because they are at the heartbeat of trade.
Thank you, Angela.
And as long as we are listening to the women, we'll be able to focus and we'll be able to change our strategy. However, I want to commend the women entrepreneurs for having been extremely resilient, for having thought forward during the COVID period, and for having embraced that times have changed, and they are now making headway into the next steps, regardless of which direction this step takes us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. You're making very fundamental points, and I was finding difficult cutting through your submission, especially coming from where you come, the sector that you represent. But I need to quickly run to the Center for Budget and Tax Policy. Patrick Katabazi, are you with us? Pardon? Okay, we will need to reconnect with Patrick Katabazi and Bernard Mujuni. You listen to a lady like Angela and what she's threshing out as the challenges, the opportunities, and where we actually stand as a country and as a people. And we're discussing policy, we're discussing the legal framework that exists, we're discussing what information is available and how are we putting the resources that we have available for us. So I want to come back to Professor here and go to a public health question. And the question is, reflecting on the universal health care and its role in social protection, where do we stand as this country? Why is it important?
Thank you, Charles. You're asking a very fundamental question in terms of where we are, especially at this point in time. Within health, as part of government program, is really structured to deal with one of the recurring protection issues. We all get sick at one point or the other, and we need someone to fix that. And when we talk of social protection, I think this panel have had a lot about retirement and savings. Apparently, health risks tend to recur very much, and you don't have to wait until retirement to be sick. So government here and globally, there is now what we call sustainable development goals. Among them, one of the pillars there is to ensure universal health coverage of services to all people that need them. It has like 5 tenants, but in general you can look at it as one of the trying to seek this concern of trying to provide health protection across board, and try also to correct the imbalances that are there in society about who gets care and who doesn't. So just briefly to say that it has the aspiration of covering every person, if you're Ugandan, every Ugandan, giving you more and more services that at least are required to fix or to get you feeling well and not falling into being sick like now. Not getting COVID is one of the issues we are dealing with. The other tenant is that in doing so, you should not spend, or should be affordable. In other words, you should not become poor or fall into poverty because you have to pay for big surgery or big admission or cancer. The other issue is they should be of good quality enough to be effective. Should be feasible to provide. In other words, you should have the infrastructure, the technology, the workforce, and the resources, budgets, allocation, and the like, private sector included in that. But also in Uganda, we've added this, that should be multi-sectoral, that health does not come in just hospitals and health institutions alone. You need to get the water, you need to be educated well to avoid, on the road you need to be safe, and like now we are saying, put a mask on your face. All of these are things that together form what we call universal health coverage. Now, Uganda, we are doing well in some aspects and not so well in others. But I can say that if you look at immunization, in every year we have almost 2 million pregnant mothers and giving birth to nearly the same amount of children who in a year they all need to get immunized. And every year this is a recurrent. If you look at that alone, you have so many services that can actually take out the entire health budget right now if you were to provide it as government alone and no one else is taking care of. So just that sector is very big, and we are doing fairly well in terms of covering many people. Now almost 70% of women are delivering within the safe hands.
Those 16 of them are dying every day?
Apparently, that's why I'm saying that we are not yet up to there. But if you look at what we are able to do with the resources available and the partnership of the private sector and the donors that help us a lot is being done. If we are on our own, I believe those numbers you're talking about will be a lot higher.
Let me come in here, Professor. The question of, we've been debating a national health insurance policy and law. We haven't really resolved that major issue. Everybody agrees it's necessary. I don't know where the problem is. How close are we to getting to that? Even if we got there, you realize a bigger problem with this COVID-19.
Yes.
The most vulnerable area for employers who are providing work-based health insurance is as you begin to lean your fat and manage within. If you haven't sent people into redundancy, you haven't reduced their salary, you're going to look at these schemes or reduce how much exposure you have to health insurance. I think it is Salima who was telling us about the numbers of people who are on insurance, including health insurance, 2%. Where does that put us? And how do we get out of it?
So I want to say that insurance is going to be one of the tools, but if, as you just observed, it can't be the only tool, because it can only serve a very small group of people right now, those who are in employment and are able to contribute if the way it is designed currently. A lot of people who are in the informal sector who might contribute are not yet structured right enough to be able to mobilize that funds and to be able to contribute. And many insurance schemes, they start with the employed. So if your goal is to achieve universal coverage and you have 42 million, you will go very little distance with just the insurance part as in the national health insurance. Meaning that we need that to cater for that 2-4% depending on their dependents. But the biggest insurance of any state still is government. Even when you look at countries that have gone into insurance ahead of us, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania here, they've all now almost become government-funded insurance. So it is like going back to national responsibility of government to finance health.
Thank you.
So we needed to continue to advocate for where it can play a role, but if we are to achieve our goals as we plan, it is going to be a tool that will not take us there, but can take a small group. But also we need to be careful that the moment you put it as an entitlement, then it also creates, in the short term, first 20 years are really full of turmoil, so you really need to plan long enough, have a tough skin to go through that. Because if you see Ghana has almost made the U-turn, although on the books they still say they have the national insurance, but when you look inside, it's no longer insurance. And these are the issues that if you're not prepared enough, the pressure of going into insurance can eventually create short-term challenges that, if not well managed, can, as my colleague said, we need to do political economy. The political economy of insurance in Africa is very difficult to look at, partly because states are poor, private sector is poor, there are few people employed, cooperatives are almost not, they are almost failed somehow. So you get a mixture of situations which do not help you to move fast.
You know, Professor, at the risk of disagreeing with you, I'm really thinking hard about our definition, our glorification of poverty, especially at government level. We have a problem, I think, as African countries, as Africa, as Africans, we have a huge problem with that mentality that we are poor, when actually we are either failing to mobilize the resources, or when we mobilize the resources, we're putting them to the wrong things. I've been,
so if I glorified poverty, more correct this. I know that as Uganda, we are not a poor country. But let me put things in perspective. Where I come from, I see that there are actually things that the money we have now can fix. But if you look at government goals in every sector, they want to achieve 70, 90, 100% change in 5 years usually, or 10 years at most. But the calculation of what it takes to move from 30 to 70, 80, we may not achieve in 20 years. So we may not be poor. The reason people are saying we have implementation failure, yes, There's no way you can achieve 70 unless you're a magician.
But
you cannot.
But Professor,
so we are not poor, but our ambitions are too high compared to the resources.
One of the things that amused me most is the first donation that we got voluntarily as a result of COVID-19 was $150,000 from Tony Elumelu. Where did the president say he's going to put the money? To buy cars. Then the other day he's speaking and he's talking about the real economy and the vulnerable economy. We don't produce these cars. Yes, Chira Motors might produce some cars for us later, but we have been focusing on cars. For example, are we putting our money where we need to put it most? Let me ask Patrick.
I also want to weigh in on the conversation.
Yes. Can I bring in Patrick briefly? Then we'll weigh in, because Patrick is at the Center for Budget and Tax Policy. So maybe he might help us to ground this a little better. Yes, Patrick. I want you to come in, reflecting on Uganda's social protection framework and what you're hearing from the panelists, the discussion we are having in studio at the moment. We have issues of financing. You have done budget analysis. We have a budget of 45.4 trillion shillings for the year 2020-2021. We are coming, that is a growth of 6% from the budget last year, which was at 40 trillion. Are we on track to achieve social protection? Are we putting our money where we need to put it?
Yes, Charles, first of all, I want to categorically state that the minister who gave the inaugural address for this e-conference was spot on regarding social protection in a policy context. The Commissioner for Equity and Rights has done a very good job in adding to that voice. So it leaves me with no doubt that there is adequate understanding of social protection within government. What we are failing to see is that understanding translated into action, and action in this regard, budget and planning. I know the commissioner did say that there are adequate resources, but the problem is prioritization. He is right. And I want to point out some specific examples. Overall, spending for social protection in Uganda is less than 1%. That is quite glaring. In the budget that we are talking about, and many people, including myself, have stated that this budget process for the financial year 2021 is not COVID responsive, and the process is leading to finalization of the budget happened when we were faced, or when we had started seeing significant impacts of COVID. And the fact that government structures did not take into account some of these tells a lot. I'll point out one example, or quite a number of them. Social assistance grants for empowerment, the money for other persons that has been talked about by a number of speakers in this conference, has a funding gap of 45.5 billion. That is the budget for next year. So as we are seeing national rollout of social assistance grants for empowerment, with this funding gap, it is not going to happen. Or if it happens, it may not be effectively implemented in a manner that would see all benefiting other persons, those who are 8 years and above, getting a chance to participate in this program. And in my view, I think that's a very significant gap there. The budget for street children, I don't know if the minister is still online, but that also has a significant gap in the next year's budget of about 5.8 billion. Funds for people with disabilities. This has been debated on and on and on. So by and large, Charles, the budget for social protection interventions, particularly those that relate with non-contributory schemes or programs, is inadequate. And if we are to think that the budget for financial year 2021 is COVID responsive, the answer is no. And this provides us an opportunity with thinking outside the box, getting ways how then do we ensure that we get back on the drawing board and start looking at how best we can mobilize resources, ensure that these glaring effects or impacts that are manifesting of COVID-19 are taken care of. So, and if government did that, that would be a very, very good thing to do.
Thank you.
Because, Charles, you know, the president and many others every day talk about providing support for business enterprises. They even say providing support for small-scale business enterprises. The idea here is that when you create a good environment for businesses, that people will automatically get the money in their pockets. But what is happening right now is that most people have spent money that they had at their disposal. Some have gone ahead into eating in the capital that they had. So even if you actually give money to enterprises, there is a section of Ugandans who may not be having money to spend. So that brings into question the issue of aggregate demand and effective demand. That even when you provide support to an enterprise that will produce so much that may not be consumed in the economy, then ultimately that investment may not bring very, very good results. And that's why we are telling government that investing in social protection actually tackles the demand side of things. Because then, if you're dispensing the cash grants to people who are, to older persons, automatically you're building their income purchasing power. And that will meet the supply intervention from the companies that we are talking about. And then we shall have what we call effective demand. Demand backed by ability to pay. So, Charles, as part of the development equation, social protection world over is now acknowledged as a significant contributing factor to economic growth. And this is the message that the government of Uganda needs to listen. I know for sure that quite a number of government officials tend to think that social protection is creating a dependency syndrome, that you're dishing out money to people that will make people lazy. Some actually say that these social protection interventions are falling, cannot be sustainable. We have had that debate. But the news here that we want to communicate is that investing in social protection has a significant return on economic growth. And in my view, if we can put together a business case, and I know there's a very, very strong business case for investing in social protection, I'm sure some of these answers will be, some of these questions that we normally get asked will be answered.
Thank you, Patrick.
Charles, before I take leave of that, one of the challenges that we have, for instance, in our civil society setting, is that we have not yet fully appreciated what social protection is all about. When we are budgeting for, when we are looking at education, there's social protection there. Health, it has been talked about, there's social protection there. Housing and feeding. So for me, if a civil society organization working on some of these interventions, it is a high time that now you start opening your eyes.
It has to be in to instigate. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
We need to start talking about some of these realities.
Thank you, Patrick.
Charles.
Yes. Patrick, can I come back to you shortly after? Because I don't want Honorable Rabhora and Salima here to lose the point they wanted to add to the discussion we were having earlier. So if you can kindly stay on, I hope the technology will allow us. And I think that was Bernard Mujuni who wanted to come in, but we'll come to him. So where do I start? Let me start with Salima, and then I'll come to you.
Okay. I just wanted to weigh in on the conversation about resources. And I really do not want us to sit here and resign to the fact that there is no resources and therefore nothing should be done about social protection. But adding on to what Patrick said earlier, first of all, resource mobilization is based on a number of things. One is your legal and policy framework. Now, where in a country like Uganda, where social protection is not clearly even articulated under our constitution, and there is not enough, enabling law to talk about social protection, but also we've been discussing here that the informal sector is also largely left out of all our legal and policy frameworks. Right now, we are only relying on the National Social Protection Policy, which is, yes, comprehensive, but it does little in terms of helping us mobilize the required resources. So first of all, we have to start at that point, having adequate legal and policy framework to be able to mobilize resources. But secondly, again, the whole issue of having quality data. Because many people just talk about the fact that we do not have money, but we don't even know how many people would actually require this social protection. So you find that even people who are willing to chip in, for example, international development partners who are willing to bring in money, sometimes they are asking these questions. How many people are we talking about that we would want to impact? And that information doesn't exist. Where it exists, sometimes it's not disaggregated, for example, according to needs, because again, you do not simply put forward the fact that, for example, persons with disabilities will need assistance. But among the persons with disabilities, you have those who have hearing impairment, you have those who have visual impairment. So like the needs are kind of different and we need disaggregation. But also Angela was talking about the gender perspectives regarding these social protection issues. So we need to have this data disaggregated, but also know for planning purposes, who are we planning for? How many people are we going to cater for? But looking at our data, you find lack of coordination. You find URSB, for example, is supposed to collect information, birth and death registration. But do they speak properly to the other entities that are collecting data? How does it feed into, for example, what is happening at the Electoral Commission? How does it feed into what is happening at WUBOS? So you find that if you're going to say URSB, for example, today, said there are 1 million children who are born in 2020. If in 2026, now education is telling us, oh, we are planning for 6 million children, there has to be questions. How come education is now talking about 6 million children, yet URSB told us in 2024, you would assume that in P1 by that time, you have 1 million children. If they're below that, then how many have dropped off? So we need to invest in quality data and know who we are planning for.
Is it data that is absent, or is it asymmetries, information asymmetries? Synergies. Because I can tell you, this government has a lot of information. There is a lot of data. Yes, and it's available with very competent institutions. I think the problem is the information house that Uganda Bureau of Statistics, for example, almost belongs to Uganda Bureau of Statistics. The one that is at NERA almost belongs to NERA and NITA. Then the information that is, it is so scattered that maybe that's why Honorable was asking Makerere
to kind of match. And this is what I'm talking about. So if we've not planned, we cannot just simply sit and say we do not have resources when we don't even know how many people are affected in the first place. So we need to strengthen those areas, the legal and policy framework, and then the data that is being collected, it has to be brought together and we get to understand how much budget are we talking about. Then the other issue of regarding resources is that consistently we are seeing that issues of social protection are being included in our National Development Plan, for example. And by the time the Planning Authority is including social protection as one of the key areas for strategic intervention, they know that it contributes to economic development, for example. But when we go back to assess the financing of the development plan, then there is a gap. It's like we do the National Development Plan on one side, and then the budget people do something completely divorced from what is being said in the National Development Plan.
You know, this year we're supposed to be lower middle income, huh?
Yes,
so COVID
absolutely.
should have found us, COVID should have found us at lower middle income.
Absolutely.
And maybe we would have been more resilient.
And
if
the
we had
more
arrived
reason,
at that.
you know, it is a misnomer for people to start talking about middle income. We are about to get there. And at the same time, we are saying we are a very poor country that cannot cater for people. But also, there are countries that are almost within our range that are being able to implement these policies because there is better planning in terms of catering for social protection. Just with COVID alone, you saw that Kenya immediately they put out money to be able to support people who are out of job. And they even were innovative to say, let's, for example, create jobs like for fumigating areas, like sanitizing areas that would give jobs to people who are out of their ordinary jobs, to be able to enable them continue earn a living. But also countries are beginning now to put in place unemployment benefits, which would also be useful in that regard. But on our end, people are doing things in silos. You find that, for example, development partners, the other day it was said in the Observer that USAID had availed money to give individuals between 100,000 to 240,000 in cash, individuals benefiting because of the distress they are facing in COVID-19. But then people were sending us messages and asking, how are the beneficiaries of this being identified? It's an NGO that was implementing this. And you're calling the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and you can't even find information.
Well,
so you find that
is following, he's still around, he'll come in through.
Yes, so you find that part of our problem is that lack of coordination, whereby you would even find one individual benefiting from 3 different available grants. So the person who's getting 100 to 240,000, ideally, should not be looking at the senior citizen grant, should not be looking, for example, at the food distribution. They should be able to leave it to some other person. But because we lack coordination, everybody is doing something in one corner. And yet, if these things were brought together, actually what we are seeing as an enormous problem may be lessened to a very large extent. But also, lastly, on the issue of resources. For us to come to the conclusion that there is no resources for social protection anymore, there has to be proof, there has to be a demonstration that the government has deployed its maximum available resources and come to the conclusion that this is the best that we can do. And when we are talking about deploying the maximum available resources, we are also looking to the fact that government has said, okay, within our domestic budgets, we've allocated, for example, 1 trillion. We've also looked to the to Irish aid, and I gotten 500,000 from there. We've looked to the US government. We've also gotten 1 trillion there. And this is the basket that we have. Many questions that Ugandans have at the moment is that, you know, they've seen all different development partners bring money to the basket. And they're wondering, what is all this money doing? It could be doing something, but it is not being communicated, or it's not even being brought into one place in order to have meaningful impact. You know, so we have to be able to ask these questions. How much resources came from the government? How much has come from development partners, to come to that conclusion that this is how what was collected has been utilized, and really we cannot move beyond that, which is not happening at the moment.
And you need to be able to draw a line between what you're getting as grants and the burden of loans, and the terms of those loans.
Charles,
yes.
The whole idea is on social accountability. Because, like she said, that we have a social contract with government. But what I don't want to believe with her is that we don't have legal framework. Actually, we have enough for us to implement now. The Constitution is very clear.
Maybe on the legal framework, for example, let me just give you an example of minimum wage. We talked about people running out, for example, within 15 days of having experienced the lockdown. That shows you that actually people are living hand to mouth even when they are on job. They are not earning enough to make meaningful savings. So in a situation where, for example, we don't have a minimum wage law, you cannot start saying our law is adequate. But I also spoke to the issue of the informal sector, for example. I'm yet to see proper frameworks that properly identify how we are putting the informal sector into the fold of social protection.
I think what
Okay, go ahead and make your
what I
point.
was trying to say is that our constitution is the social security and social protection issue is enshrined in the Constitution Chapter 4, which talks about rights and freedoms. Actually, Article 14 specifies that the state should ensure that all Ugandans enjoy these rights. We have the national objectives and principles of the state, that the state shall make reasonable provision for the welfare and maintenance of everybody in Uganda, including the aged. Uganda is signed into a number of protocols, the Livingstone Call to Action of 2006, the African Union on the policy on social protection. We have a lot of regional and international laws to which we are members and we have signed to, and that compels us to have all the national legislations. The National Social Protection Policy, if it had been implemented even an inch, we would be somewhere. And what brings all these 15 days people off is the system. Can we create a system and even allow it to work? Because there is somewhere where government seems to want to create a system and then goes back and interfere with the system. Thirdly, I want to say that the issue we have is not of resources, of lack of resources. When we are trying to buy new cars, can we take stock of all the cars that are parked at ministries? Go to Ministry of Health and look at the cars that are parked in the back in their compound. Go to Ministry of Works. Go to all the local governments. The cars are parked. And then when you want to add cars to those which are parked, actually one of the cars recently caused an accident. And we no longer count, we have that car. It was donated and it simply went like that. And it went with even lives. So somewhere our priorities are not right. The budget planning and budget implementation is not right. And even the resource utilization, which must take us into the real economy. Because for me, when I hear the word real, I want to see reality. But when you talk about real, even when I've not read His Excellency's book, I want this reality, where you want to tell me that we need more cars when we are seeing cars parked. The cars that are parked at the ministries only lack a little thing that would be fixed, and because they are new cars, if you went there. And this is, I think, just a wastage of resources, or maybe it's a fancy that people should drive some more new cars or maybe up-to-date cars. But at the same time, to Bernard, I know that the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development is the bedrock of social protection. It is a multi-sectoral approach, I know, but the bedrock is in the Ministry of Gender, which is perennially underfunded. Wherever there is a budget cut, it will affect this. Everything that comes as a shock will shock the Ministry of Gender before it shocks any other sector. The other sectors' budgets are growing, and for the Ministry of Gender, which is in charge of our social development and social welfare, is the one that never has a budget. And I think this needs to be addressed specifically, because that is when, unless this is addressed, then even the national social protection policy will not be financed, and therefore it will not be implemented. It will just be on the shelves. So I want to talk to the Equal Opportunities Committee.
Yes.
The Equal Opportunities Committee is expected to be autonomous completely. But if they are going to wear gloves as they try to oversee issues of equal opportunities, then we have lost it, because social protection directly falls into their oversight. They must ensure there is inclusivity, they must ensure there is a life of dignity, they must ensure that equal opportunities are there for all and not for some. And therefore, I would like to call on that particular Equal Opportunities Commission to reread their terms of reference, because they compel them to oversee whether there is inclusivity in whatever we do, whether the resources are spread well, whether social security is being taken as a right and not just something. And I want to reiterate what Patrick said. We are not inadequate of the budget of expanding social protection by 45 billion just because we don't have resources. It is because it's not a priority. Because every time you see priorities which are not even lined up in the NDP, And you ask yourself, where has this now come from? It simply falls in and it takes money. Secondly, if you claim that this money that we give to the older persons is just a mere encouragement of people to be lazy and do what, then use WEP and YLP to build resilience, so that by the time these women and youths fall into the other age, they can no longer look at 25,000 anymore. They will be as resilient. But what we see in the YLP, what we see in UWEP, and even in the grants for disability, is to eat and either die, or eat and sleep, or eat and suffer on the streets. There is nothing embedded to build resilience, so that by the time they are of age, they will not look at SAGE. These older persons who are looking at SAGE, 93% of them have no other income to fall to, because they were not civil servants. So there is no pension for them. Most of them were just in these casual and informal things of hunting and pottery and carpentry, and therefore when they lose the ability to work by themselves, they look at the government, to which they worked anyway, to support them. So I think this multi-sectoral approach needs to look at each sector, so that social protection does not come as a relief. We even have a whole disaster management ministry which only gives relief. They are only reactionary. They don't plan. There is no preparedness. Every time Kasese got a similar issue 7 years ago. And the government was like it has never heard about it. Today, they are looking at Kasese as if they have never seen it. And yet, government got money from the Egyptian government to do a realistic feasibility study onto the floods in Kasese. Before we get a report, 7 years down the road, the floods are here again. And this time, very devastating. So something is seriously lacking on us.
And you can predict that they will come back another time?
They will, because they continue to come.
Space?
Yes.
No, I hear you, Honorable, and I think as a moderator, I'm supposed not to share my own opinion, but I need, as a Ugandan, I need to share my opinion. That I think we have gotten stuck in a mindset of poverty that government is stuck in, especially when it facilitates it to go and beg for money and borrow money in our name. And individuals also get stuck in that same thing. And that's why we're actually poor. We are not poor.
We are not poor
as a people. We're not poor as a country. No. We are not poor as a people. Only that the mindset tells us that we're supposed to be poor. Let me, Honorable Oboro, I wanted to ask, what are you doing about some of these issues that you're raising at the Parliamentary Forum?
Yeah, you see,
what kind of discussion is going on there?
The Uganda Parliamentary Forum is not a statutory committee of parliament.
Yes.
This is a forum of members of parliament with a common interest on the subject matter. And therefore, you will find us with a membership of 200 members of parliament. And yet the committees will have 25, 30. So this group of MPs, we have a mandate clear. One, for us, we influence legislation. Actually, from the National Social Protection Policy, we as Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection, we are spearheading the development of legislation, because policy comes with no sanctions. It's just a guideline. We want now a legislation that will sanction, that will even penalize, and those who will not, the duty bearers that will not take their duty right. And then we do spearhead advocacy. We are kind of a pressure group. We work with civil society organizations to do research and provide members of parliament with evidence-based issues that they can articulate on the floor of parliament about social protection.
Have you made a presentation to the committee debating the new NSSF Act? And what's your position as a parliamentary forum on this clamor for 20%?
Actually, before even the 20% came, we already placed our position paper to the Committee on Gender about the National Social Security Fund amendments. One clear issue for us was these Ugandans who retire, reach retirement, most of them are not used to getting bumper money. They are used to money that is phased. That every month he will sit and know my 2 million is coming or my 1 million is coming, and they budget for that. Most of them, you give them money as a one-off, and I was asking UBRA whether there is any report on the review of whether this money, when it is taken by the retired people, it benefits them. If I can just look at Yegegwa, most of those teachers who have got the money, most of those private sector people who have been working and rich and driving, when they give them this pension, then the quacks will come and give them false projects, and then they invest.
The money will disappear.
And the money disappears, and the person goes back.
Implying that the preparation should start way early.
Yes, way
and it doesn't happen.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I need to cut in and get Bernard Mojuni. He's been waiting on, his first Zoom session ended before we got him. We've gotten him back on. Bernard, can you come in? The many issues coming up on the ministry where you serve on social protection. And there was a question specifically about how much coordination is there within government on this question of social protection and the private sector.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles, for bringing me back to the panel. I wish I had all the time to come in there, but I've been itching.
Yes.
One, the question you have just raised is that we have coordination mechanisms for social protection. And I already raised this in my earlier submission that we have the program of action plan of interventions, and it maps out responsibility and accountability centers. I'm encouraging people to read and know, because they're even functional thematic groups, and we meet regularly to assess the progress, composed and chaired by Office of the Prime Minister and so many other things going on. So there is no such a question like lack of coordination framework for social protection in this country. It's unfortunate. But I wanted to come on the issue of vulnerability as defined from the poverty perspective. This, I think we have conquered. It's not the right narrative. Social protection is about mitigating the social risks and shocks and building resilience so that people can cope up in case of any shocks. And to me, that's a bare minimum. Social protection makes a lot of business sense in this country, and there's a lot of studies which have been going on to give the case for social protection. It is also very unfortunate for someone to say that the government is poor and therefore what they are giving dirty beans. This is a not very good argument in this kind of, we are helping to bring up knowledge and bridge up knowledge gap. Government has people, it's people, it cannot be poor. It's a bad mentality to stigmatize yourself and say your own self, you are poor. Yes, I know that the state might not have all the resources to commit 100%, but who says that once you are born, you must walk and therefore run and win a marathon? We've been into a journey, designing legal and policy frameworks. It is the first time we have evaluated a social protection policy after 5 years or so. And this should not be unfairly judged. We are taking baby steps, but they are very, very key and fundamental. And I think you can see how it is creating incentives. Even this parliamentary forum on social protection wasn't there. It is an offshoot. It is an output of this policy. So thank and say, yes, trust your government that it can deliver. And let us build synergies. I think that's the best way we can approach social protection in this country. It is also not true that the social development sector is underfunded. Actually, 90% of all NGO money, including the one which ISER is implementing, is from the social development sector. But you look at the ministry and try to apportion and narrowly stretch that, hey, the ministry is underfunded. No, the sector is hugely funded. The issue is, what impact are you causing to that you are utilizing to deliver a service, to deliver goods, to deliver social protection programs? Is it being quantified? Is it being quantified as a contribution to social protection? So many donors and civil society, church-based, they are delivering on social protection in different localities in this country. But it is discounted when it comes to mapping the contribution margin. And this is very unfair. And so we want to say, yes, we need more resources. And no sector is hugely or adequately funded, including all the popular sectors. There is the gentleman, the professor told us, Minister of Health, if we put the prioritized immunization, they wouldn't even fund any other service at Minister of Health. So the distribution nature of social protection is very interesting. It is the best way to address income inequality. And that one, Salma raised this question that there's no information. If you come to the ministry, kindly probably came during the COVID era, and some people had gone into self-isolation. But I can tell you, there's nothing like you will need information and you can't get it from the ministry, except there are some gaps, and I highlighted this. We need a social registry to help to coordinate and map and collect data from community and household level. It should have been the system to help targeting the vulnerable groups and during this COVID, but we do not have that collective information system from the community. But we are working with the European Union and World Bank to make sure that we develop it. There is also some gaps in the policy and in the legislation. Yes, the constitution is there, yeah, protocols are there, but internally here, we need to codify and protect social protection. It is largely in policy and scattered in different other laws. So we need one cardinal proper legislation that codifies and protects it. Otherwise, it will also be vulnerable anytime.
Thank you.
Just raise the issue of begging. I think let us be very clear here. His Excellency, the President, announced contributions from different stakeholders across the country, world over, and people volunteered to bring in their contribution. Everyone brought in, people gave in their salaries. Don't discount. I think let us not discount the people who sacrificed their resources to make sure they help. Everyone needed to help. It is the core operating system of NRM is its people. I think this should be understood that the Android or the iOS of NRM is by tapping it, not NRM, but even any other government in leadership is the people themselves. So once they come together, don't discount their effort and say that the government went begging. I think this is very unfortunate. I sound very political, but I think that is I think the alignment which we need very much. And finally,
I'm happy you say that.
Implementation of social protection as questionable. It is very unfair to say that the implementation of social protection is questionable because there is a roadmap, a clear national roadmap that you can tap into. Actually, I'm advising if you go into the ESP, expanding social protection website, you'll get a roadmap, and we have more than doubled the funding. Now we are going country and then going down in terms of years. I've just confirmed, I will say that the government has allocated 81 billion. By the way, money meant for youth livelihood program, women entrepreneurship program, and these are billions of money. Green jobs, billions of money. NUSAF, these are billions of money. CADIP, billions of money. These are formative programs, are social protection interventions.
Thank you.
And if you like, ESP and some of the health programs are actually social protection programs. They are affirmative action programs.
Thank you,
so
Bernard.
quantify them and see the contribution margin, and then you can easily acknowledge that there is a lot of effort, but only we need to define this thing called social protection and who is contributing what.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Thank you.
I want to make one last emphasis, Charles, that you see, for us here, we are thinking of mobilizing resources to go for funding from these development partners. The European economies and the USA, for them, they are printing their money. Okay? And that should be looked at in terms of where are you getting your resources to run the economy? Are you borrowing or are you using internal resources? And the biggest resource for any country is its people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Okay.
Yes,
let me just say this, because we're left with about 6 minutes to get out of here. I was hoping that I would get in 1 or 2 callers, looking a little bit difficult, but if you can try 0414 563462, we might be able to get in 1 call. So I'm going to request the panelists and the commentators who are joining us via Zoom to structure your concluding remarks in summary so that we get out of here in time. Yes, Honorable.
Yeah, sure. 2 things. One is that it's not about saying that government is poor, but the unreadiness that exhibited during COVID requires that government goes back to the drawing board. Where are the government reserves? Where are the government warehouses? Where are their silos? Is what we are asking about. Because for the communities to come and do that community work, I think is in our tradition. But government should have exhibited a high spirit of readiness. It really showed us that COVID found it unready, and that is why in the first month there was a lot of things, including arrests, because they were running around. Two, the National Social Protection Policy was only enacted in 2015. The Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection is of 2011. And we are the ones who spearheaded the development of the policy, because Ministry of Gender had started implementing SAGE without a single policy. And we are saying, how are you going to do this without a policy? And we spearheaded this. It did not create us, we created it. And that is why we are going on to even working on the legislation. We are going to fast track this. And so Ministry of Gender should up their speed, because we are not going to wait. We are going to bring it as a private member's bill if they are so slow, and so that the parliament can take step on that.
Let me pick a caller. This one call. Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello?
Yes, your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment very brief. I have only 3 minutes in studio.
I'm called Lydia Mustasi, and I'm calling from Kawempe. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm called Lydia Mustasi.
Yes, Lydia, put your question. Yes, please, go ahead with the question.
I've been observing this discussion. Yes, I have been observing this discussion, and I would like to thank that whole team for their effort in explaining to us. And therefore, yes, and I would like the Honorable Oro to highlight more on the plight of the unemployed people right now who have been put off work on unpaid leave in this COVID.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia.
We were expecting that probably the area of work would put to light the 20% NSSF. The health insurance where I work ends this month, and we are going for no pay leave for 5 months.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's fundamental.
How do we sustain? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lydia. We can only take one. The people of Butaleja, someone, Frank Wadidi is watching us from Butaleja and says they are marveling at your contribution. They're happy with, they wish you went and contested in Butaleja instead of Chegegwa. They thinking the people of Chegegwa were very lucky to have you. They are saying a combination of Salima, Honorable Flavia, and Angela, and the professor, that you make a very fantastic team. And they also, he's also been watching the first session, so he's been with us from the beginning and talking about a discussion between him and his dad a few days ago about social protection. My time is out. I have callers online, but I can't pick them. So, Professor, let me have your 30 seconds.
Wow. Thank you very much, Charles, for moderating for this period. I have two quick summary points. One, to thank all Ugandans for, first of all, for listening to us, but also for what they've gone through the last almost 80 days, and wish to encourage them to continue to secure their health and those of their loved one by continuing to put in place measures that can continue to save us as a country from COVID. So distance yourself, mask, avoid crowds if you must, and as we've been discussing, contribute to those that are vulnerable around you, because we as a society are all government, and I think that makes a rich government of Uganda if we all contribute. I also want to thank the health workers, police and security officers, and those who work in utility companies, because those are the ones also providing the social security package that has helped us to continue going, running, especially for us in towns, maybe not those in urban. Lastly, to correct that, yes, we are a very rich country, so I'm trying to put in my apologies for having, but like any country in this world, there is no country that has enough resources to cater for the needs of its population.
Thank you.
So what I was trying to say, let's try to advocate for the social security package and interventions, as we also know that government is going to make priorities.
Thank you very much. Salima?
Okay,
30 seconds.
No, just allow me, I think, to quickly raise a number of issues.
Time is out, I'm afraid.
Making recommendations,
sure.
you know, like in terms of what the policymakers should be focusing on. One, we need to ensure an adequate legal and policy and institutional framework. But two, we need to adopt long-term, comprehensive, coherent and coordinated policies that are speaking to each other such that the impact for social protection is felt. 3, we need to respect the principles of equality and non-discrimination. And in doing that, we have to incorporate the gender perspective and also look into the issues of selection of beneficiaries, and also complying with standards of accessibility, adaptability, acceptability, and adequacy. Then we have to invest in adequate data. I talked about it earlier. Ensuring transparency and access to information for all. And then ensuring meaningful participation in the design and implementation of programs. This is something that we hadn't really talked about during this discussion. And then ensuring access to complaint mechanisms and effective remedies in cases of violations or where there is need for enforcement. Lastly, I cannot overemphasize the issue of deploying our maximum available resources in a properly planned manner such that there is comprehensive social protection availed. Now, earlier we talked about the fact that social protection has a redistributive impact. It helps to cushion people from the vulnerabilities that they experience from time to time. It contributes to development. So this is not something that we should be discussing just as something that should be happening in a country, but we should look at it as an entitlement. And this is the perspective with which the policymakers should be looking at social protection. Thank you.
Thank you. You have Lydia's question in 30 seconds as well.
I think we need to find fiscal space for social protection programs as a very, very important policy priority by broadening the tax base, reducing tax exemptions and tax evasion rates with a very strict legislation. 2, social protection should be seen as an investment other than an expenditure to lift most of the vulnerable people out of extreme poverty.
Okay.
Development is not about objects, it's about the people. You can do your roads and the poor people won't travel on them. They will take their panya routes. You can do your electricity when the poor people even don't have the money to link it to their houses.
We do better here with dry cassava and grana
I think we need to look at human resource development if you have to talk about it.
Respond to Lydia. Lydia, her insurance is running out this month.
Yes.
She's been sent on leave for 5 months. What does she do?
So what we need to do as government, as policymakers, is to make sure that government compels each sector to work on a social protection intervention. And therefore, that is going to be audited. We need a social protection audit. We need to declare social protection as one of the cross-cutting, like environment, like gender, like we have done for equity. We need to declare social protection as a cross-cutting issue so that it is even audited, a social protection audit, and then each sector is compelled to cater for the social protection of their workers.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm not able to provide another opportunity for closing remarks for Angela Bagene, but Angela from the Uganda Women Entrepreneurs Association, thank you very much for your contribution. Patrick Katabazi, Executive Director at the Center for Budget and Tax Policy, thank you very much. I've run out of time, and Bernard Mujuni from the Ministry of Gender, thank you very much for making the contribution that you've made to this discussion from the time we began and participating in the 2 panels. For the people participating in the earlier panels, I would like to thank Rose Achayo. Rose Achayo, thank you very much for your contribution to the discussion. And Fred Were Watega, thank you very much for your contribution. Then back to the studio here. The Honorable Sylvia, the Honorable Rabhoro, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Flavia Rabhoro Kabahenda, thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for making time for this discussion. Professor Freddy Sengoba, for making the time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sadima, for putting this together, this e-conference, and for your contributions to this discussion. Thank you very much to Sylvia Mwewa Ntambi. That's why I was mixing the names. Sylvia Mwewa, thank you very much for your contribution earlier in the first discussion. Of course, to Martin Nsuboga from UBRA. I'd like to thank in a very special way my colleague, Susan Mujawa, who's been giving us the sign language interpretation, the production crew that has made sure that this is delivered, And of course, you, our viewers, I see a lot of contributions. Apologies to those I was not able to reach, and for those of you who are not able to get into this discussion. But this debate on social protection should ideally continue. What ISER has done is kick the ball. Let's get into the discussion, and for government to reflect, for individuals to reflect, and for civil society and other actors to engage into this and say, where do we stand as a country, where do we stand as a people, where do we need to be, how do we need to get there? So thank you very much. From me, Charles Mongu Shampagi, wishing you all the best of this weekend and the rest of the week.